I like to think that tactics games, isometric turn-based RPGs, are the meatloaf of video game genres. They're solid, reliable, always at least a bit tasty, but unless you grew up eating your mom's version of it, you probably have no interest or desire or even understanding of why such a dish, such a genre, is so coveted and enduring and loved. It's not pizza, it's not cake, and it's definitely not duck l'orange. Tactics games, to those outside the loaf bubble, are simply a pile of semi-sweet, semi-gelatinous shaped meat products consumed by a group of people who probably think ketchup is too spicy. Which is to say, there is no dynamic movement or controls, usually no flashy graphics, usually little to no cultural impact or social currency or relevancy, and most certainly, by definition, very little intrinsic action. Tactics games are slow, they are deliberate, and they are specific in all aspects, and therein lies the barrier of entry. In order to like meatloaf, you kind of already have to like meatloaf. While this analogy might seem a bit hard to swallow, the effects remain. Tactics games are a niche within a niche, an acquired taste, if you will. Despite the proselytizing nature of the genre's fanbase, the apparent influence, the influence measured by sales anyway, is dwarfed by franchises or games like Call of Duty, Candy Crush, FIFA, etc., and even franchises or games within the genre of RPG, or maybe even its own eponymous series. For context, Final Fantasy Tactics has sold just shy of about 3 million copies worldwide across all platforms and versions since its release in June 1997. For comparison, From Software's newest action RPG opus, Elden Ring, has sold over 17 million copies in less than a year of its February 2022 release. And that developer had been considered niche beforehand. High sales does not equate high art for sure, but in this increasingly connected world, high volume is often associated with high influence. This is all to say that while the fervor of such fans of the tactics subgenre is almost always at a pitch not unlike a happy pig at a sloppy trough, the actual day-to-day sway is more a gentle lapping than a crashing wave. Despite the realities of you or your friend not knowing or playing any tactics games, and more specifically Final Fantasy Tactics, hopefully this video will elucidate the reasons why such a game had and has the staying power of any mainline Final Fantasy entry, and RPGs in general, and why it is widely considered one of the best tactics games the genre has on offer. I will try to break down and review gameplay, story, and impact as we come across it. But first, let's start with the story. Some of the best fantasy and sci-fi is often modeled on or around our real-life histories. Final Fantasy Tactics is no different in this regard, albeit with magic and monsters, and Yasumi Matsuno, the game's lead writer and director, uses this to great effect. The game's main narrative thrust and general backstory is modeled after the War of the Roses, a real-life, middle-aged conflict where a series of civil wars broke out for control of the English monarchy in the 14th century, mostly between two houses, the Yorks and Lancasters. In fact, these civil wars existed after a historical period known as the 100 Years' War, a moniker the game lifts partly, where the socioeconomic issues of the time, collapsing feudalism, proxy wars, high taxes, failing leadership, led to a persistent weakening of the English crown and kingdom. However, the game uses this real-world historical conflict as more an overall springboard to its own story than a one-to-one interpretation. The pieces are mostly similar, a grand 50 instead of 100 years war that leaves the crown and kingdom of Ivalice in a precipitous crossroads, and the two main houses or factions at the heart of it, the Order of the Northern and Southern Sky. Their conflict becomes the focal point of the schism and eventually of the civil war dubbed the War of the Lions. Preceding the War of the Lions, Ivalice recovers from a conflict known as the 50 Years' War, as I previously stated, against a state known as Ordalia. After the king of Ivalice, our main character's adopted father, dies of illness, the vacuum of power immediately following an already bloody and lingering conflict erupts into civil war, mainly because of an issue of succession. Princess Ovelia and Prince Orinus both vie and contend for the throne by rights, but are both too young to claim rule. Thus, a regent would be appointed to rule in their stead until either comes of age. Princess Ovelia is next in line, but she is a woman, and Prince Orinus is but an infant, so the true power of rule would come from the regent apparent, and this is where our Civil War players come in. Prince Goltana of the Black Line supports Ovelia, and Prince Larg of the White Line supports the infant Orinus. And thus the stage and actors are set, we, the player, can begin our journey. The game starts, like most games, at the start menu. However, when we choose a new game, instead of seeing a cutscene or general overture, we are introduced instead to a brief of text and to our curator and historian Arislam Darai, an ancestor of a particular lineage we will meet in the game. Arislam is our de facto narrator and, more importantly, our only voice and perspective on the events that will proceed in the game. It's a bold framing device, actually, and a bold way to start the game by admitting to us players that this is not wholly accurate, and what is presented in the game can potentially be construed as interpretation or conjecture. Although ultimately I think what we see in the game is the vast truth of it, the unreliable narrator framing device does add to the authenticity and fun of the medieval narrative. In fact, the in-game description of Arislam even suggests his interpretation sparked controversy within whatever modern form of government or academia his time period exists in. From here, we are asked to input a name. We'll use the default and canonical one, Ramza, and a birthday for our character. Now, the birth date seems unimportant, but actually can affect combat heavily via the zodiac sign mechanic. And it works like this. Each zodiac sign out of a possible 12 signs has an opposite, visually understood as numbers would be on a clock. In addition, each zodiac sign has a good-bad compatibility associated with its sister sign. Here's a completely unobtrusive, clear visual guide to what I mean. Got it? In all seriousness though, what this means to us, the player, is that a best compatibility confers a multiplier of 1.5. A good one confers a 1.25 multiplier. A bad one is a 0.75 multiplier. And finally, worst is an abysmal half, or 0.5. So, for example, if an attack has a base 50% chance to poison, if a unit has a best zodiac compatibility, that chance would effectively be multiplied by 1.5 times, i.e. a 75% chance to inflict said poison. And that's not counting any buffs or debuffs or gear effects. Luckily, we can completely ignore this mechanic and never think about it again, besides every once in a while wondering why Ancelot does so little damage to that ordinary red chocobo compared to Ramza. But if we decide to min-max or do any sort of challenge run, then this mechanic would best be understood. Oh, and moreover, if our unit is the same sex or opposite sex, this will further influence the compatibility ranking system, but again, this largely can be ignored. And I suppose I'll go over this now, partly because it's germane to the Zodiac system, and partly because you'll probably hear me bitch and bemoan throughout the video about it, but the concept of rational numbers and probability seem to be a sort of four-letter word in Final Fantasy Tactics. Let me explain. The colors red, blue, and green are real. The color of yellow is a mystical experience shared by everybody. These words are said by Guildenstern, and Tom Stopper's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, and itself is a reference and abstraction of Goethe's model of empiricism, which is a philosophy that all knowledge is derived from sense experience. We can never really know something as fact if we cannot first experience or sense it. Final Fantasy Tactics takes that abstraction and applies it to its numerical quotients and systems. Because in fact, and I've done the research, I've done the math, if an attack has an 84% chance to succeed, it's actually 43%. If it's a 23% chance, it's actually 75%. Now stay with me. And of course, if it's a 75% chance, it's closer to 85%. But if it's an actually 12% chance, it's roughly about 25%. If it's 50%, it's actually 42%. If it's 93%, it actually only confers about a 50% chance. 37%? Nope. 61. 68? Nope. 56. About 9%. About actually 27%. Anything in the 30% range is an automatic 46% plus. 100% though is indeed true, just as 0% is. So in fact, one can truly never know the correct percentage or probability of success if one does not simply do. It is through the experience the truth becomes known, not the number on the screen, not the knowledge of practice and logic. Only from experience can we all enjoy the mysticism of yellow. Now, for those who have not played this game before, that admittedly muddy analogy and appraisal might seem like complete gibberish, and it very well could be, but for those watching that have played this game before, know that your madness is not your own. I see you, I know you, and I know the game is indeed born from some ulterior dark dimension where numbers are actually just cool little squiggles akin to hieroglyphs. I mean, just look at the axes and bags in the game, or Rafa and Merrick. In fact, some of you who have played another excellent excellent series of tactics games called XCOM may be all too familiar with the 99% chance point-blank shotgun somehow missing. This then results in an avalanche, a deluge of death if you will, and misery and bad luck that would make Vegas casinos blush. The initial miss meaning that the enemy gets to respond in kind, having of course a string of turns and moves not unlike being hustled at a pool hall, having someone run the table on you, somehow pulling off billion-dollar lottery-type sequences that completely wipe you out. And this event could and will make one question the ethics of probability, the meaning of choice and consequence, the eventual heat death of the goddamn universe, the futility of control and existence itself. What I mean to say is, 1% chance ends up feeling like they forgot to show you the other two missing zeros after the one, you know? I suppose we should actually start the game now, yeah? The story begins in the magic city of Garland, where our two main characters, Ramza and Delita, are about to be deployed to mop up some brigands from the Corpse Brigade, a troop of deferred and ousted knights and soldiers that were cast aside after the 50 Years' War. After a brief conversation about the political nature of Ivalice, we are ordered to head out and bolster Larg's northern order and take down these corpse rogues. After a prompt to save for the first time, we are introduced to a small 5x5 square field that we can deploy whomever we have on our roster list onto the potential battlefield. This choosing at first seems quaint and even perfunctory for the first third of the game, honestly, but this prelude ends up being a subtle and powerful introduction to the concept of Final Fantasy Tactics and tactics games in general. The shape or lineup or initial position of your units will play heavily into your opening actions and thus dictate how the opening enemy volley will go. In some cases, as we come to them, this is a make or break, life or death decision that makes tactics games so alluring and enduring to its fans. The fact that you can lose a battle before it even starts based on seemingly token actions or decisions, in this case unit placement, but most of the time honestly this has little consequence. However, in other cases it may be the only way to survive a clearly overstacked onslaught and win by the skin of your teeth, or the only way to steal a rare item from an enemy that only shows up in that battle, or learn a valuable skill, or to fandangle the enemy AI into attacking your tankiest unit. It is subtle like I said, but the sooner one understands this, the smoother some of the more annoying fights will go. So now we can begin the meat and potatoes of our adventure, the thing you'll be doing most in the game, the combat. Since this is ostensibly the tutorial of the game, our units are made up of the most basic of classes, or jobs as they're called in this game. The chemist, who has the ability to throw restorative items at long range and equip guns naturally, and the squire, an all-arounder with a smattering of basic low damage, low stat pumping techniques, and the inherent ability to equip most items in the game. In addition to a job's explicit actions only that job can do, each job or class also has an implicit passive quality, whether this means the ability to equip certain items and gear, or having naturally higher stats like attack or speed or movement bonuses. To expound, each job is also allowed a sub-job command, which is essentially equipping the active abilities called commands of another job. So you could have a unit be a white mage with the sub-job commands of a monk, or a black mage, or knight, and so on, and any combination therein. Not only do tactics games rely on combat in an ordered tactical manner, but the ability to outfit your units is equally as comprehensive and purposeful as the moment-to-moment gameplay. Think of it like a complex domino run, where your goal is not only to start the domino effect that eventually leads to your desired outcome, but being able to actively manipulate the outcome in predetermined instances, your mission and your turns respectively. I will touch on more of these job specifics soon, and as we come to them. But for now, we are only controlling a couple of chemists and a couple of squires, along with Ramza, our main character, and our guest character, Delita. A guest character being an AI-controlled character that can and will do the stupidest things that make no sense and often do nothing or get themselves killed for no reason. At first, this may seem like a who cares moment because they can't die or turn into crystals or treasure chests, the way a unit is lost permanently in this game and can't be revived in any other way. But there are a few times throughout the playthrough where this quirk of game and AI design will frustrate you to no end, as it did with me, and will result in literally losing the game instantly with zero player input or agency, no matter what you had done beforehand. A proverbial roll of the dice and kick in the nuts all at once. I'll point these moments out as we come across them. I mean, it'll be hard to miss, for there are few, but when they show up, many a curse words and possibly controllers will be flung at a rapid pace. The tutorial battle is rather simple. The player gets a feel for the combat, the grid-like approach to unit movement and action, the basic controls, the basic understanding of the flow of combat, and interstitial lore and dialogue that pops up in most story missions. It plays out in a rather easy demeanor, nothing too crazy, nothing even a novice couldn't handle. So we beat the Brigans of the Corpse Brigade, and at the end of the mission, Ramza chastises their lifeless bodies with a sanctimonious, privileged jab about leading a life that would not leave them dead in their beds at old age, but rather in the streets, forgotten. This is important because it shows us that Ramza is a few things: young and headstrong, a bit cloistered and unaware of the greater realities of life outside his proper upbringing, and the fact that he will fight for what he believes in. It may seem a simple jab, a simple interstitial, a medieval one-liner of sorts, but this is actually a thesis for Ramza, and it is what we should expect going forward from him. Most players in their first playthrough of this game will see the red dot on the map and the cream-colored line connecting to it from their current position and think to themselves, well, I guess I will walk that line to the dot, and then we'll walk that line to the dot. And then when the next line comes, the next dot appears, those same logical-based players will repeat the action until, eventually, the final credits roll and the game is completed. This is cause and effect writ naturally, but for experienced, seasoned loaf players of Final Fantasy Tactics, Mundalia Plains, the first line and dot of the game respectively, the first map and tile set you are allowed to move between, may as well be the last node before the final boss, before the credits roll, because from these humble Taurish plains where feral cats and goblins and striding chocobos come to do battle, we will meet them and destroy them over and over and over again until our roster is filled with dual-wielding knights, samurai dancers, ninja bards, time mage mathematicians, or even dark knights who dabble in the holy art of white magic. And thanks to certain emulators, we players can blaze through these grinding sessions by quartering the time necessary for such an endeavor. We can't effectively become gods for the first 60% of the game simply by beating up our own party members like some violent, sadistic version of patty cake. And this is what I have opted to do for this playthrough. I decided to play how an experienced degenerate in Final Fantasy Tactics should play. Hilariously overpowered, so the story missions can be completed with little regard for difficulty, at least until the final Wheatgraph fight, but we'll get to that eventually. The Final Fantasy Tactics leveling system mostly deals with combat. In other words, when one performs an action during combat, one is awarded a certain amount of experience and JP, or job points, the points necessary to acquire various active, reactive, passive, and movement-based abilities for any one job. Once a unit receives 100 experience, that unit levels up, gaining stats and HP/MP. In addition to said experience, a unit also receives a ratio amount of JP based on the current level of that unit's job. However, if a unit attacks a lower level unit, that experience will be reduced accordingly. But here's the rub: JP will not be reduced, and so any action confers a reliable, repeatable amount of JP regardless of unit experience level. This all means that in one battle, given enough patience and time, and sometimes potions, a player could theoretically master a job, which is the act of acquiring all abilities the job has on offer, as well as getting to the max job level of 8. The way a player changes and acquires new jobs or new classes is by combining certain levels of other jobs. For example, the Dancer job requires the unit to be female and to have the Geomancer leveled up to 4, and the Lancer job leveled to 4 as well. So what I will do for this playthrough is try to get Ramza to dual-wield swords as a knight and master the knight job, and this requires being a ninja, which in itself requires leveling a few other jobs to certain thresholds. The reason why having an emulator arbitrarily speed up the game is so that what would normally take a boring 15 to 20 hours of throwing stones and potions and yelling at my units will be cut down significantly. As you will, at certain points in the game's story, acquire special units and characters, this initial burst of versatility in the roster will try to diminish the absurd power creep some of these story units will provide. Thunder God, I'm looking at you. Even being overleveled, eventually the power curve will flatten out and I'll actually have to play the game in a somewhat competent way. That being said, there are still certain fights in the game that are pretty brutal. So much so that my first ever playthrough of Final Fantasy Tactics way back in the late 90s forced me to restart the game over entirely because I essentially bricked my save and was stonewalled and could not progress because I was simply not prepared for a certain fight the game forces upon you. And many times they do this back to back. Basically, my first 10-ish hours of this playthrough will be a montage of Mandalia Plains, so enjoy. The story point of Mandalia Plains is also where we meet a certain prick of a character known as Argith, or Argus for the OG Tactics players. Argith is a low-level nobleman from a mid-tier noble house and is currently being accosted by some enemy squires and thieves. Here we are introduced to our first taste of how, let's say, unfortunate the guest AI can be for us. We are given a choice to either A, help Argith, or B, destroy the enemy. A cool little bit of stat fun happens in this choice as well. Anytime you are presented with such a choice for a story battle, no matter what option you choose, Ramza's bravery or faith substat is increased or decreased. Bravery affects physical damage. The greater the number to a cap of 100 or 0, the more damage you deal and receive. And faith affects magical damage. The more you have, the more magical damage you deal and receive. A funny note, the cutoff for low bravery units is 9. So if a unit has 9 or lower bravery, they will literally turn into a chicken and become uncontrollable and will flee all around the battlefield. But there's benefit too. The find movement ability that chemists have allow the player to find items on certain tiles of a battlefield, sometimes extremely rare and powerful items, especially in the Dark Dungeon endgame activity, and the lower the bravery a unit has, the greater chance the item found will be of a rare variety. However, be warned, at 15 bravery or lower, the unit has a chance to desert your roster at the end of the battle. This can include story recruited units as well. In any case, after dispatching the rogues harassing Argith, he pleads for us to take him back to the high seat of Beowulf and to the Order of the Northern Sky, Egros Castle. Argith reveals that his Marquis Elmdor, has been captured by the Corpse Brigade. But for the next 7 to 10 hours, we will be hard grinding to get JP, so Argith and the Marquis Elmdor de Limberry will have to wait. I will try to get Ramza dual wielding. I will try to get a unit basically to steal anything I need for later missions via the Thief, and I will give at least a few other units the ability to chakra and revive, two very useful JP grinding and leveling abilities from the Monk job. Before we venture off to Egros, we'll probably end up roughly in the low 20s or mid 20s for our units' levels. That'll give a good smattering of job abilities, and while I could keep going until I literally max out every job on Mandalia Plains, I prefer my sanity, and for the brevity of this video, I will decide to stop around there. So, after our grinding session on the holy lands of Mandalia Plains, we finally venture back into the story and to our second map, the Siege Wheel, where we will quickly dispatch some goblins and bomb monsters. Delita and Argith exchange tensions and Ramza gets annoyed, as usual, but my dancers and bards have a fun time debuffing the enemies to a point where I essentially remove half their units and my bard makes sure we are topped off with re-raise and haste and regen, as one does. On a side note, the Bard and Dancer jobs are quite nice for JP grinding because their fastest abilities do low damage and have low recovery, and have such low CT, the time it takes between turns, that it allows them to act more frequently and still complete their actions. Meaning, if a unit is at max HP and you heal that unit, you will receive no experience or JP from that action. So it behooves you to squeeze out even a 1 HP heal or damage in order to get the full amount of JP from that action. You may see me do this in the video where I will toy with the enemy units as long as I can in order to keep the JP train a-going. Choo choo. This is how you grind like a true degenerate. Next up is Trade City Dorter and its slums. This is the story mission where we are introduced to Wiegraf, a soon-to-be thorn in our side for the first half of the game. Wiegraf is grilling one of his Corpse Brigade subordinates about the plot and the abduction of Marquis Elmdor. It seems our brigand leader has a bit of a leaky company, and some men seem to be loyal to someone else. After scaring the subordinate to give up where the Marquis is located, the Sandrat Siege in the southern desert, Ramza and lads bust in and scare off Wiegraf. This fight is actually the first time where the game tests you. It can be a fairly tough fight if you just went straight from map to map without grinding at all. The archer at the top of the favela can easily pick your weaker units off, and the two black mages can outright one-shot you. In addition to the tanky knight and the terrible guest AI, the other two archers round out the enemy ranks to make the fight a bit of a dangerous one. I suggest taking care of the archer on the favela first, and then going from there. However, considering I'm level 27 and the enemy's level 2, I make very quick work of these dullards and continue on with the story. The captured Brigan reveals he is from a splinter faction within the Corpse Brigade. At the threat of a beating or torture by our well-adjusted bourgeoisie friend Argith, Ramza rebukes this threat and instead pleads logic with the captured enemy, even though Argith remains the interrogator, and quite the happy one at that. Remember, the Corpse Brigade are simply soldiers who were cast aside in the previous 50 years' war. They were loyal, they were competent, and they heeded the call of their lords and rallied their bannermen when it was required. By rights, the Corpse Brigade have done all that a dutiful soldier or knight or countryman should, and all they want is to be paid their due and to be recognized as honorable men. They didn't choose this life in their minds. It was the crown that forced their now criminal hand. And someone like Argith, a proxy for the crown and nobility and power of Ivalice, cannot understand this because one station in life is for life, regardless of outcome or prejudice. The haves will have, and the have-nots will remain empty. This is the way of things for Argith and by proxy the crown. I mean, he calls these loyal soldiers swine, for God's sakes, muck-ridden animals made for the slaughter. To say we should think highly of Argith, of the nobility of Ivalice, is to admit that we are no better than those that cast these men aside. This scene is the wedge that ultimately bifurcates Ramza and Talita, even if they cannot see it yet. Does one correct this behavior, this mindset, save the sinking country, or does one let it all die and birth something new, something built from the ashes of mistake? Ramza is an idealist, but so is Talita. They just simply come at the same goal through different prisms. This will be elucidated more as the story progresses, but no, this is why the writing in this game, particularly in the PSP remake, is so beloved. It's not your average JRPG or fantasy story or tropes. There are true characters and stakes at play. After outfitting our units at the shop, which periodically updates with new weapons and armor as the story progresses, we adjust some job actions and allocate some job points, and we continue on to Zklaw's Desert, the home of the splinter faction of the Corpse Brigade. Holed up in a dilapidated building, Ramza and Troop corner the enemy in their siege and do battle. Again, if I weren't so overpowered, this fight sometimes can be a tough one because the game forces you to split your party in two, and the archer, again, with the crossbow inside the siege, will be protected by his knights and high-damaging monks, and will sometimes pick off your units as you close in and surround them. I suppose a cornered animal is truly the most dangerous after all. But not even a cornered, rabid animal could assuage my overpowered units from their song of fury and death. I obliterate these fools with rapidity. After the battle, we view a scene where Wiegraf confronts Gustav, the Splinter faction leader, and chastises him for the error in judgment by the point of a sword. Gustav appeals and says dreams do not fill a man's stomach, but this does little to sway Wiegraf. He is steadfast in his resolve to correct the crown in its discriminate path. Perhaps Gustav was correct, perhaps he was a tragic figure, but we will never know because Wiegraf has had enough and silences Gustav forever. I love this scene because the thrust and slash and death rattle are so well animated and so full of character, even though it's just a collection of pixels, that it really highlights again why this game is so highly regarded, certainly to me. The music, the especially unctuous sound design, the beautiful animations, the wonderful writing, the addicting gameplay, the overall package screams passion and creativity, and it oozes out every orifice this game possesses. Complexity is good, but simplicity is often better, even though it paradoxically is often a lot harder to achieve. When something is simple and yet evokes such strong emotion or connection, that is the definition of success in my opinion. Much like how a short story must convince the reader of its importance or beauty through economy of language, 20,000 words to make a point is fine, but 20 words to make the same point, now that's difficult. In any case, Wiegraf allows us to access the ailing Marquis and take him back to Egros in exchange for his freedom, further saying this was not his company's intention. What they want is real change, not to be branded as simple sellswords or criminals, or brigands. Back in Egros, Lord Dystarg, half-brother of Ramza, wants answers. Talita attempts to shift blame on himself, but of course the Ned Starkian Ramza cannot allow that. Dystarg doesn't care though, and as an older lord brother would, castigates Ramza for his insubordination. Duke Larg, the would-be king regent of the Northern Sky, suddenly appears from the unseen corners of the hall, and in his infinite patience, permits our troop to aid in the final campaign against the Corpse Brigade. Dystarg and Larg, however, seem to have plans of their own, and make mention to each other of the Marquis and of Gustav and of the ailing king of Ivalice. Quite the trifecta, don't you think? I mean, if this isn't the face of a man who only wants good from the realm, then I don't know what is. Our next map and battle is at Brigan's Den, south of Mundalia Plains. Once a home for fishermen, it is now overrun with brigands, and we are tasked to rout these squatters out. A young female knight, Maluda, sister of Wheatgraph, and her cohorts discuss the strife within their company, detailing their losses and anxieties. It seems the walls are closing in, and they know it. After defeating all of Maluda's convoy, she relents and flees, but not without some parting words. She designates us as no different than her just because we were all born between different sets of walls. She should be held as flawed and not Ramza, not the aristocracy. She and her family starved and fought and scraped by. And to call her thieves as we steal from their right to live is tantamount to war. And of course, Argith denies these claims and further instills his caste worldview by calling her father baseborn and her mother a gutter whore and her chattel. Charming fella, that one. Argith claims it is his divine right, his highborn status, and Maluda rejects that notion, saying all men are equal under the eyes of the gods. After the twos exchange, Delita has a simple but powerful epiphany and question aimed at Ramza, and by proxy at the crown. Is this woman truly our enemy? Who exactly is in the wrong here? We transgress against people who just want what they're owed, and we have party members like Argith, out-of-touch rich boy who sees himself a soldier of divinity, who wants to eradicate people like Maluda. Again, who exactly are the good guys here? In the meantime, at Egros Castle, high seat of Galleon, at the manse of Beowulf, Tietra, Delita's younger sister, is taken hostage. In an attempt to abscond with Alma, Ramza's younger sister, Ramza's older half-brother Zalbag dispatches the abductor with ease. He is a feared warrior for a reason, after all. Dystark is wounded severely, however, in the apparent assault at Beowulf Manor, and he orders Lord Zalbag to scour every nook and cranny for the brigands and eviscerate them all. The dominoes have begun to fall. Dystark informs Ramza and company that Zalbag will lead a final assault on the brigands' garrison once it is found, and he promises he has taken measures to ensure Tietra's safety. She is like a sister to him, he says. Insert shifty Dystark face. Delita fumes outside the Beowulf manse, and Ramza desperately tries to curtail his anger. Ramza wants to do the orderly, knightly, right thing, but Delita knows the truth of it. If not for him to rescue his one and only sister, who else will? They are not highborn, they are not nobility. He must take action himself. He cannot rely on those who promise power. He must wield his own power. It's an important turning point for Delita's character, and another reason as to why he is probably my favorite character in the story. Delita truly recognizes the fault of inaction, of duty, of claim, of station, and understands that in order for the world to care, he must make the world care. His character, throughout the entire story, is constantly riding this moral line. Delita is a truly great, complex character because he is willing to scheme and act and do what must be done in order for the world to reflect how he wants it. It would be very easy for him to slip into villainhood, but as the story progresses, you'll see why his actions tend to be the right one, even if you, the player, might not initially agree with them. In the end, you will ask yourself if Delita is a good man, and you will probably not have an easy answer. In my opinion, that's what makes a good character. Regardless of how you feel about them, you can understand why they did what they did and recognize the intent and outcome as sometimes being difficult to discern. Argith comes outside to meet the two arguing friends to essentially add fuel to the fire, and suggests that Tietra isn't worth the trouble, and the fact that Dystark has given any regard to her is pure grace and should be seen as a gift to someone of such low nobility as Delita and Tietra are. Delita takes this well, and thanks Argith's sage advice by decking the fool in his smarmy face, and then runs off in a huff. Argith appeals to Ramza, but Ramza is done with his shit just as much as Delita is, and tells Argith to leave and never return. Argith tells us to head to Fort Zeekton, the probable location of the Corpse Brigade headquarters. Argith wishes his soft-hearted friend luck in the coming battles, but only shrugs when his words are not taken, and he is told once again to be gone. For all of Argith's bluster and sanctimonious blathering, he often has a sharper wit to the politics that surround the kingdom of Ivalice. He's a dick through and through, a pious cunt for sure, but his advice is wise nonetheless. Even though he's a villain or antagonist, there is still wisdom in his words, and what pisses off Delita so much about Argith, I suspect, is that he somewhat agrees with Argith's assessment. The world is stratified. terrified. Argith makes sure we are reminded of this. So does Dystarg and Larg, and it is a bitter pill to swallow for Delita. Hence his frustration and anger, even though Argith remains rather plain about it all. Argith is being judgmental, but he is also speaking plainly and pragmatically. What I love about these exchanges is that Delita becomes a sort of fusion of Argith and Ramza, the idealistic and good nature of Ramza, and the pragmatic and cold nature of Argith. But that character turn has yet to happen. As we leave Egros Castle, we are treated to the first of many CG cutscenes that PSP Remake has introduced.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Do you think Tetra might be watching this same sunset?
Don't worry, Delita. I'm sure she is well.
Something's been bothering me, Ramza, for some time now.
Argoth's words trouble you. Am I not right?
There are things beyond the power of our changing, Ramza. Try though we might.
Do not say that. If a thing can be endeavored, it
Will endeavor grant me an army? I would save Tetra with these hands, if aught were in my power to do. But I cannot. 'Tis my meager lot in this life. Do you remember, Ramza? When your father showed us how to make a whistle of a blade of grass.
Originally, this scene was played out in an in-game cutscene just like any other cutscene, so to see this redone in a grander way is quite nice. I appreciate the effort even if I have trouble never enjoying the 3D anime style. At Linalian Plateau, we meet again and for the last time, Wheatgraft's sister Maluda. She leads a party looking for egress but laments that truly there is nowhere left to run. This is it. And she's right, our party quickly defeats these brigands and kills Maluda. Our next map is Fovaham Wind Flats, at a small windmill and farm where Wheatgraft waits for his sister's report that will never come. Wheatgraft grills one of his subordinates and asks why they decided to kidnap Tetra. Gragoroth admits it was the only way to help them escape. Not to mention, she may be a useful bargaining chip, for they incorrectly think she is of Beowulf blood. Wheatgraft does not enjoy the kidnapping, the ransoming, for he wants to be taken seriously. He wants a better world for his men and their children. He is an idealist, caught between reality and obscurity, and he feels his ideals slipping through his fingers every waking moment. Wheatgraft would rather die than betray his ideals, and so would allow others in his employ to die as well. His behavior is frankly just like Delita's, just like Dystar, just like Cortana, just like all those who vie for power and change, but he just can't quite do what needs to be done yet. One of his ranks informs him of Maluda's death, and he comes to meet those that ended her in battle. This battle is the first time we see the terrible power and threat of Wheatgraft. While I am still too overpowered for him to do anything of import, this marks the first time we are on the receiving end of a Holy Knight or White Knight in the PSP version, and of the job command Holy Sword Arts. In addition to his fearsome abilities, Wheatgraft is also equipped with better items than we can even buy at the moment, so his attacks will be even stronger. We will receive a few party members whom will have this job as their default, so we will eventually be able to use these ridiculously overpowered abilities ourselves, but for now, we must only witness it and enjoy the fun animations. Holy Blade art allows sword wielders to attack at a distance in addition to targeting multiple tiles and therefore multiple units. The cherry on top is that each ability also confers a detrimental status effect like stop or death or silence, which even if the move only does 1 damage, the status effect itself can completely turn the tide of battle and basically make one lose or win instantly. Even though Wheatgraft states he will die trying to avenge Maluda, the second we damage him enough, he teleports away. This will happen a lot in our playthrough, so get used to it. Well, actually, in this case, even though I am so much stronger than him, one of Wiegraf's Holy Sword techniques can cause instant KO or instant death, and this will trigger him teleporting away, as well as he uses it to one-shot Ramza. He also gains a level by doing this to add salt to the wound, so there's that. This is where the true motives of the Order are laid bare. Gustav kidnapped the Marquis under the orders of Duke Larg and Dystarg and Zalbag in order to capture power in the wake of the king's death. The civil war has come to the forefront. Forward now to the snowy fort of Ziekten, the last bastion of the nearly routed Corpse Brigade. Gragoroth, the most metal name a soldier could possibly have, holds Tietra on a rampart and tells Argith and Zalbag to stay put or he'll kill her. He sweetens the threat to include the stores of gunpowder packed within the keep as a literal self-destruct mechanic and last-ditch effort if things go sour. Zalbag doesn't parley with terrorists, however, and so orders Argith to let loose an arrow into the only impediment to victory. And just as the arrow is flung from Argith's crossbow, Delita and Ramza witness it all. Gragoroth, being a true soldier, had no intentions of ever killing Tietra, and as the killing blow strikes her gut, he cannot help but exclaim to the gods before he too is almost killed and absconds into the fort. Delita calls Argith a whoreson dog, and Argith agrees to the fight. Ramza is in disbelief that his brothers would stoop to such craven tactics, so unbecoming of lord lieges such as they are. During the battle, Ramza asks why Argith followed such an order, and Argith rebukes such a moral assertion by stating that they, the highborn, are fundamentally different to those who are lowborn. It is simply the way of life, of fate. Had they been mongering flowers on some street corner as their lot should, they would yet live. He asks why Ramza would take up arms against his own family, his own house and order. Ramza says they would never justify a tactic, and Argith is simply in awe at how someone so naive was lucky enough to be born of such high status. He is disgusted at the bleeding of this sheep. Ramza should be a true Beowulf and rule those that need ruling, the true duty of his lineage. Ramza doesn't like the idea of being a puppet, however, of someone who has no free will, but Argith disagrees, suggesting that the true puppets stand before them, ready to beckon their puppeteers' commands. House Beowulf is the aegis of lesser houses. To survive is to command, to survive is to serve. The real truth of a feudal society. Argith points out that even Ramza uses those around him, much like his best friend Delita. If you had chosen to kill the attackers at Mandalia Plains and not help Argith, Argith now will tell you that it was the correct choice, morally and tactically, that Ramza thought as a highborn would, as a ruler would, as his house should. Stunned, Ramza falls silent. Argith decides to antagonize Delita by showing him that such commoners as he and his sister are should be relegated to dismissal and obscurity. By rights, this stage is not theirs to strut upon, and Argith will show him this reality and kill him as he did his sister. Delita finally decides right there, right then, that he will not be told what to do or when. Not by Argith, not by anyone else. This is the point Delita procures resolve and sets forth in his own path. And in his fury, Delita denies Ramza's concern for his life and tells him in no uncertain terms that once Argith is dealt with, Delita will come after Ramza. Ramza is also defeated by this notion. In one fell swoop, Ramza's crystalline worldview is shattered. His house is built upon lies and corpses, his best friend has abandoned him, and he has no idea who he is at the moment and who he needs to be in order to right all the wrongs he's being bombarded with. Delita is reborn from the ashes of defeat while Ramza is cast down to the lowest depths he's ever been at. When Argith dies, so does the old world, and from this fight the real story begins. Something is rotten in the state of Ivalice, and in the next chapter of the game, the stench of it comes to a fracture point, and the real threat is revealed. The War of the Lines will show us who and what the true Zodiac Braves are.
I'm sorry, Delita. Ah! What was that? The powder! Delita! We must away! Delita! 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 had lived my life the only way that I had known. But when the pillars of that life came crashing down, I did not stand and watch them fall. I turned and walked away.
Princess!
This way. Be quick. And try making a little less noise.
I'll not take orders from you!
You've quite a mouth on you, princess. Forgive me. 'Tis your birth and faith that wrong you, not I.
Hold there! Damn!
Is it truly him?
It cannot be!
Delita, he lives? But why does he fight under the banner of Duke Goltana?
Technically speaking, the start of the game is not at Garland, but at Orbone Monastery, and that Golden Knight we see in the intro FMV, the one you just saw, is in fact Delita. He is on a mission to abduct the would-be princess, Lady Ovelia. Her holy knight Agrius stays by her side and informs her that her hired convoy has arrived. In walks an older man clad in umber armor, Gafgarian, and would you know it, Ramza is there with him as well. It seems he is now a mercenary of sorts. In the time since Zeekden, Ramza has turned away from his duty of lineage in order to find his own path in life. Agrius admonishes Gafgarian, but his curt retort implies he holds little regard for such formality or holy disposition. He is a coin for hire, and he will only pay heed to those that pay. He is in the employ of the Northern Sky, not of it, he says, so these courtesies mean little. Agrius, however, is a true white knight, a true aegis of the church, and comports herself accordingly. She might be stiff in the ways of social elegance, but she is earnest and dutiful, and, we'll see, quite the formidable warrior. However, a knight under Aegris informs us the enemy, Delita's party, Duke Altana's party, they think, is upon us. To battle we must, and earn our keep, says Gafgarian. This is technically the first time we, the player, are allowed to issue commands and move our units, get a feel for the game, etc. But the battle is nigh impossible to lose, so it's more an interactive cutscene than anything else. As we will see, Aegris, a holy or white knight, dispatch the various archers with Stasis Blade, or Stop Blade for the OG fans. And of course, Gafgarian is a Fell Knight and will use the Night Blade, a powerful HP absorb that will sometimes one-shot the enemy. Lucky for us players, the Dark Knight job has this ability as well, and others, so we'll get to use this eventually ourselves. But for now, the two guests in our party make quick work of the enemy till the battle is won, and we get another quick FMV for our efforts. So fast forward past chapter 1 of the game, after the battle and after Delita absconds with Princess Avelia, the heir apparent that the Northern Sky backs, if you remember. Gafgarian asks Ramza if he knows that Golden Knight. An old Gaffy boy may seem the ruffian or the cantankerous old man mercenary, but he's perceptive and knows which way the wind blows, even if Ramza won't admit it. Aegris says she will pursue Delita, even if the sellsword Gafgarian says he will not. Elder Simon, the head priest of Orbone Monastery, warns Aegris of the danger, but she will not relent. The oath of a knight is to protect, and that is the end of it. Ramza insists, however, that he be allowed to venture with her. It's been some time since he's seen Delita, since Zeekden, and he seems to stand in opposition of their once sworn house, so Ramza must understand the motives of his estranged friend. Gafgarian doesn't even argue and capitulates readily. Interesting, I'd say. We can elect to attain Lad, the Squire, or the two knights with Aegris into our roster. I choose to do so because I'll mostly use them for tavern missions. Little events you can assign units to when venturing into a city's tavern where you can get a nice quick chunk of JP. There are some strategies when using tavern missions, like using particular jobs for particular missions, but in most cases this simply confers a slight increase in JP gained and won't wholly prevent you from any content. Also, because I'm using an emulator with speed modifiers and save states, this makes the tavern missions all but a cakewalk, where usually you have to send up to 3 units away for a predetermined amount of days, each day counting as traveling from one node on the map to another. Oftentimes you'll have to pass through a green node, a place where a random battle can occur, which can trigger a fight that you might not have enough units for. Though luckily story-acquired special sprite units will remain deployable. So having save states where I can click a button and magically not have to fight that random battle makes the tavern missions that much more digestible and quick to complete. I will have Ramza as a black mage the majority of this chapter for reasons twofold. One, to make fights a little harder, because why not? I'm way over leveled anyway, but mainly to get him on the path to Dark Knight, which requires mastering Black Mage, Knight, and having 50 personal kills with that unit. The Black Mage has a lot of abilities, so it is one of the most time-consuming of the JP grinds, hence it's best to start that grind now as we blaze through the story missions. Our next map is back at Dorter, actually. Here, a thief for hire discusses payment for our party's heads with an unnamed purple knight. 500 gil per head, negotiated up to 700. Not bad, not bad. However, for the sellsword in question, not even a billion gil could be enough because not only am I over-leveled, I am the main character. Plot armor is the densest material known to man, after all, impenetrable and ineffable. The poor bastard doesn't know what's going to hit him. This is one of my favorite maps in the game because it puts your party at a severe disadvantage in the outset, as the archers will rain hell down on you, and because I just love the diorama-esque blue-tiled buildings, and there's just so much character present in such a compact space. It's one of the maps that really show off the art's direction and level design, and how the team at Squaresoft squeezed every possible ounce of juice from that creative fruit. And considering the PlayStation only had 2 megabytes, that's 2 megabytes of RAM to use, that's quite the tiny fruit to squeeze. Also, I just love how we get to see what a thief's hairline looks like under that green nasty do-rag. In any case, after routing the enemy team, Aegris suggests that we head to Fort Besilat, the most logical stronghold Avelia would be held at. After upgrading our equipment at the castle/town/ports, each having different wares available, we head to Araguai Woods, the great forest bisecting our path to Fort Besilat. We get another choice to make in this fight by either helping or ignoring a helpless chocobo. I elect to ignore him because in the end it doesn't matter, and regardless of choice I will be offered to add the chocobo to my party at the end of the fight. And yes, you can recruit monsters into your party and breed them, and in fact basically become a beastmaster if you choose, but moreover the guest AI will most likely kill the chocobo by running into the middle of a pack of goblins and getting fisted to death. If I choose to help the chocobo, the goal shifts from routing the enemy to protecting the chicken horse. which means if the chocobo dies, the game is over. So yeah, I am most definitely never choosing the escort option if I can. Oh, and just to clear up the party roster, I deny the scared chicken horse clemency and leave it in the woods to presumably die, because my god, those goddamn chicken horses will breed like crazy and lay like 12 eggs in the span of 3 maps. And it gets annoying real fast, especially since I am not doing a monster challenge run or chocobo only challenge run or what have you. So sorry PETA, no monsters for me in this playthrough. Next up is Zirschel Falls, a cool waterfall map that I love because it allows my geomancers to have some fun. Also, it is where we finally catch up with Delita and the princess. A few knights surround the two and beg for her release, but Delita knows that their true orders are most likely that of a fatal variety, and he does not buy into their lies. And speaking of lies, one of the knights orders our beloved Gafgarian to murder us all, so that's nice. Gafgarian is mildly amused, but a contract is a contract, and so obeys the order. Aegerus thinks him a turncoat, but he reminds her that he was in the employ of the Northern Sky all along, and the knights over there are of the Northern Sky. It's just that simple. The abduction was a ruse, a way to get Ovelia out in the open and kill her without political blowback, in the attempt to secure the throne by rights, aka Larg and Dystark ordered it. They made it look like Oltana did the deed and thus have an open route to war and the throne. Delita understood this, but he still thinks there's something even deeper amiss. He even addresses Ramza as if to say, see, told you this is how they operate, now you know. Ramza, in his unflappable goodness, denies allowing another Tietra to happen, and so denies Gafgarian's command and employ, and once again freeing himself from someone else's wake, and we find ourselves opposed to Gafgarian in battle. Now, I didn't do it this time because I am so over-leveled that I just don't care, but normally I would have de-equipped all of old Gaffy Boy's gear and left him stark in the wind, so as to easily make him a dead fish and not able to use his Nightblade ability. This is an important lesson, for anytime we receive a guest character in our roster, we will most likely almost immediately strip them of their items, like a good Coven or cult would, and give them the hand-me-downs of broadswords and linen robes or whatever, because sometimes they have very rare items, and they will just leave our roster in a few battles anyway, so might as well get the most out of them. During the fight, Delita and Ramza share words for the first time in 6 months, and both exclaim they are doing the right thing, trying to save Princess Ovelia, just seemingly from total opposite vectors. Perhaps he sees the verve and wit and youth of his sister Tietra in Ovelia, which will become somewhat problematic much later in the story, and so idealizes her and wants to free her from being used as a tool for others' gain, much like he and Tietra were. But what's interesting, and what we kind of suspect and see in small glimpses throughout the story so far, is that Delita is basically using Ovelia as well. Even if for his own self-governing, self-idealized goals, he still uses her as all the other players in this Game of Thrones do. The vibe of the benevolent dictator, if you will, or in other words, a king. Again, while Gafgarian is a villain to us, he's also a bit of a cheeky one at that, and I love how he immediately calls out Delita's self-aggrandizing as posturing, calling him a sellsword as well, that he was ordered to take the princess all the same. That white mustache of his is there for a reason. He's been around, he knows the score. Someone let slip the plot to kidnap the princess, and that someone is indeed controlling something even grander behind the scenes. Aegerus scolds Gafgarian and his road to perdition, saying that just because the princess is adopted, she is still of royal lineage and must be treated as such. But Gafgarian points out the truth of things, much like the other villains in the story. Her net worth is spent. She is an obstacle in the way to power that must be overcome. This is how the crown works, how the aristocracy hunts. Aegerus, the ever-dutiful holy knight, cannot abide this worldview and cannot fathom such inequity. That woman will have a hard fall, let me tell you. Ramza argues with Gafgarian too, but old Gaffy Boy puts the soft-hearted Ramza in his place and tells him a job is a job. Whether it was him or not, this was going to happen no matter what. Might as well be him who collects the coin. There is no good, there is no right here, only ambition. After letting Gafgarian flee, we clean up the rest of the knights and finish the battle. A funny little tidbit here is that no matter where Ovelia is on the map, in my case at the top of the waterfall, when the battle ends, every unit that is alive turns to look at her. It's a bit cute, if not a little nightmarish.
Let the princess with me. She will be safer in my care.
What is this game you play with us, Delita?
Game? I do no more than speak the truth. You've made an enemy of the entire order of the Northern Sky. Where would you now take her? Think, Ramza. This was Duke Larg's plan, and he would not act without counsel of the Queen. You cannot trust the crown. Would you then turn to Goltana? No, that would be folly. He would only offer up your heads in hopes of keeping his own.
And what so would you propose to do?
I would do only that which you, my lady, cannot.
You speak in nothings.
So I do. But pay it no mind. I shall leave her with you for yet a while longer.
Delita! I did not think we would meet again, but I'm glad we have.
It was Tetra. She watched over me then, as she does now.
Know that you go with my thanks, Sir Delita.
Ramza, I hope this meeting is not our last.
I owe you my thanks as well. But he's right. The northern sky will not be long in falling on us now.
This is the path I've chosen.
Ramza realizes he again has nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Agrius suggests they all go to Cardinal Delacroix and to the Church of Glabados in Lionel Province for aid, for surely they can help, surely. We continue the story with our next map, the castled city of Zeland, an elevated city built atop a small mountain which serves as a gateway to Lionel. The map certainly reflects this description, as our units must first traverse a winding vertical path in order to breach the fort walls and further ourselves into Lionel Province. Some units with a high jump stat would be highly recommended here. We are also introduced to Mustadio, a machinist from the workshop city of Gouge. His job is unique and is replicated by none other in the game. Well, actually Balthier, and yes, that Balthier has these abilities too, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Although bare on-job actions, the three the job has are extremely powerful and very efficient ways to completely disable enemy units. His snipe ability allows him to do normal attack damage with the added status effect of disable, which, as you might expect, disables enemy actions, and immobilize, which, again, unsurprisingly, disables a unit's movement. And the often overlooked but insanely useful Seal Evil, which has a guaranteed chance to turn any undead or ghost enemy unit into stone, petrifying them. There are a few story battles and random battles where Seal Evil is exceptionally useful, so don't sleep on it. Also, the Oracle job and Beowulf, a side quest character with his own special job, Templar Knight, can also cast Petrify, so you don't have to use Mustadio for the undead monsters and units, but Mustadio's ability pairs very well with the insane range of a gun that his job can equip naturally and requires no MP to use. Basically, it's free real estate. Also, his sprite has a sweet ponytail if you're into that sort of thing. Some hired goons from a rival trading company have cornered Mustadio and demand from him a certain precious stone he is apparently in possession of, a thing called Auracite. If you've played Final Fantasy XII before, or a certain raid in Final Fantasy XIV, some of these names and words should seem familiar. In any case, the goons make mention of Mustadio's father being held hostage, but Mustadio has a message for their master and employer, Ludovic. They lay a finger on his father, he destroys the stone. A little dead man switch here. For whatever dumb reason, I decide to help Mustadio instead of just killing the enemy units. So therefore, I must protect him and pray his AI doesn't get him killed. All goes well, fortunately, and after the battle, Mustadio confirms those that chased him were of Bert company, but also reveal that they're a bit more sinister than the public knows. Opium smuggling, yes, apparently opium exists in Ivalice, slave trading, and all sorts of things of ill repute. He further explains he's of Gouge, a rival city-state, a place where ancient machines from lost civilizations lay buried beneath the city, where they discovered the lost technology of guns, relics from the lost age of Saint Ajora, a woman from eons past who saved the realm with her Zodiac Braves at her side. Mustadio mentions Cardinal Delacroix as a hero of the 50 Years' War, and agrees to Agrius' plan to find respite within the Church of Glabados at Lionel. Mustadio wants an audience with the Cardinal as much as Agrius and the Princess do, for he wants him to rescue his father. Hands washing hands, as it were, and so everyone, even the Princess of Ilia, consent to the plan, and we venture off to our next story node, Elias Tor. But actually not before we get a quick cutscene. Agrias attempts to assuage Ovilia's concerns, but Ovilia remains anxious about the constant running and hiding. She laments her cloistered upbringing. Her entire life was spent behind the safety of the castle, after all, essentially a prisoner to her own office. She was once a pauper, an orphan under the care of a local monastery before she was adopted by Ramza's father, the late king. And still, Ovilia remained in the background, far removed from the realities of the kingdom, only knowing that men die for her because she is called a princess. Ovilia reaffirms the game's strong motif of agency and duty. For much like Delita or Ramza or the sellswords we cut down, she is not above what she is defined to be. Title must dictate action, and so she is swept up in this grand current of fate, unable to swim against it. Ovilia mentions another girl who thought the same as her, whom had the same lot in life actually, Ramza's sister, Alma. Ovilia is rightfully worried the Cardinal will use her, like literally every other person in her life has done, a fair and logical assessment. Ramza teaches Ovilia the same method of grass whistling his father taught him in Delita, in a show of solidarity and brotherhood. Technically, they are family after all, and it's a nice bit of sweetness before the inevitable bitterness to come. On the next map of Belai's tour, we push our way through another group of mercs hired by Barrett Company. This is one of those maps where one missed hit or buff or one well-timed crit will spell disaster for whichever side is on the wrong end of it. The first time we fight enemy summoners too, but the archers, as is a constant refrain in the game, can get quite annoying, so it's best to deal with them first. When the battle ends, we get a cutscene back in Egros Castle with Dystarg and old Gaffy Boy. Dystarg is upset that Ovilia isn't dead yet, big shocker there, and Gafgarian asks, what of Ramza? And like all good drama that has ever existed or will ever exist, the weight of the drama always pairs well with a nice glass of booze. Dystarg pours himself a glass of wine, savors the moment, and says Ramza is too stubborn for his own good. Uh-oh. If he gets in the way, his life is forfeit. Gafgarian then asks about the Cardinal and his potential alliance with Ovilia. Dystarg has already addressed that potentiality, however. Old Gaffy Boy also wonders why Dystarg would hire such a buffoon to fumble the kidnapping, but Dystarg confirms the original conspirators were found dead in the woods near the monastery, and that someone, cough, Delita, cough, cough, has gotten wind of their plots. They best be careful from now on. Finally, with Ovilia and Mustadio in tow, we arrive at Lionel Castle, the high seat of the Order of the Northern Sky. Our party meets up with Cardinal Delacroix, head of the Church of Glabados, and we tell him all that has transpired. He agrees to expose Duke Larg and promises amnesty for Ovilia, and she's allowed to stay inside the castle as she sees fit. In a double whammy of goodness, the Cardinal also agrees to send aid to Gouge and stop Barrett, but he wants to know why they are so ardent in pursuit. Mustadio is rightfully hesitant to give the reason why, the Zodiac Stone, but then the Cardinal reveals he has one of his own, a blood-red gem he lays upon the table. He and Ovilia tell us the legend of the Zodiac Braves. Long ago, before the Earth and continents held form, the Lucavi held dominion over the world. Eventually, 12 heroes came forward, including a woman called Saint Ajora, to challenge the Lucavi and defeat them, sending them back to their spirit world. Each hero bore a crystal of a house of the night sky, a constellation, and so in time became known as the Zodiac Braves. Anytime the world was threatened, the story goes, they would appear again and vanquish whatever evil needed vanquishing. The blood-red ore site on the table in front of us is considered to be one of those legendary stones. The Cardinal assumes correctly that Mustadio has seen one of those stones beneath the ancient lost detritus of Gouge, and that is why Barrett pursues him and his father so. The Cardinal reaffirms his position of help and declares the Church will wrest that stone from Barrett's hands. With that, we part ways with Agrias and Ovilia and head to Gouge to help Mustadio's pops. After some tavern missions and outfitting our units with new gear, we head to Chigalath Fenlands, the only node between us and Gouge. Remember when I hyped up Seal Evil, the special skill of Mustadio's? Well, here is the first time in the game where we will be allowed to use it and to frightening effect. The ability alone could single-handedly rout the enemy units, but as I do, I try to squeeze out as much JP as I can and play with the enemy team as long as I can, at least before I get bored enough and want to move on. This map is a bitch, no two ways about it. Probably one of my least favorite maps in the game. All water in this map is befouled and will poison you upon ending your turn in it, and there are several tiles of water which are considered deep and will prevent any action or reaction occurring. You'll almost be fully submerged with just your little tiny pixel head peeking through the muck. It'd be kind of cute if it weren't so annoying. Also, the ghosts in this game have teleport, which ignores all height and range requirements, so they can bunker your units very easily if you're not careful. This is especially apparent and lethal in the late game. In any case, I do good work and win the battle and head to Gouge. In Gouge, Mustadio notices no sign of struggle or battle from any of Barrett's units or of Lionel's. That's curious. Mustadio needs to investigate further and tells us to meet him later. We push farther into the lower belly of the city at the requested rendezvous point, but as we wait, Mustadio never comes. Then, Ludovic reveals himself and they captured Mustadio, and it seems we have fallen into a trap. All he wants is the Orsite, and so Mustadio tells us where it is so we can fetch it for Ludovic. When we toss it over to him, of course, Ludovic reneges on his promise of freedom and orders his units to kill us all. So we must battle, as is our wont in this game. The map is a cool one, and I love the dilapidated rain-soaked steeple we begin on and the general vibe of this place. It's not a hard battle, even when appropriately leveled and geared, but every once in a while, the enemy thieves might use Steelheart, an ability that charms an enemy unit to fight for their side, and that can have disastrous effects if it succeeds enough. But generally speaking, like all maps, take care of the archers first if you can, and all should be well. Not too hard, really. After the battle, we free Mustadio's father, and he tells us of Ludovic's plan with the Orisite, the holy stone of the Zodiac Braves. He wants to use the stone as a power source for the ancient machines that lie dormant under the city to build a weapon and an army. But the ever-crafty Mustadio pulled a fast one on Ludovic and gave him a replica stone, and in fact had the real stone on him the whole time. And you may have guessed, especially in a JRPG, the church was behind the whole thing, and Cardinal Delacroix was working with Ludovic the whole time. And now that he has a fake stone, Ovelia and Agrius are in danger of his wrath. So we must go and save them. With our new resolve, Mustadio formally joins our ranks, and we must away by boat to the port city of Wargelis, on the southern peninsula of the continent. QFMV.
Cogs and gulls. No hint of Lionel's griffins. Delita! What brings you to Argelus?
We have ears in many places. Few things escape our hearing.
Our?
I say this for your sake, Ramza. Return to Igros. Delve no deeper into matters of royal maidens, or those of sacred stones.
What have these ears of yours been telling you?
You think to save a princess from a burning tower. In truth, you would but set her on a higher floor. There is only one person who can truly save her, and that is what I mean to do.
Just what do you imply?
It's simple, really. Noble endeavors do not always reach the end that we desire. You cannot save the princess. However hard you endeavor to save her, you would do well to remember that.
What then is your end in all of this, Delita? I fear I do not know.
The Dukes Larg and Goltana, your brothers and all the rest. They are all of them swept up in a mighty current. A current they cannot see or feel. I simply swim against it. Nothing more. We'll meet again, I should hope.
Delita once again presumes much of our story, and even tells Ramza as much. Everyone is caught in a current they cannot escape, and all Delita wants is to swim against it. Ramza seems more the stone slowly being weathered away by the water, and I suspect Delita knows this of the stubborn Ramza and even admires it. Ramza does what he knows is right and just, and does so as the stalwart stone, brooked by neither current nor ambition. His path is that of the true knight, of the true hero. Delita wants the world to be different. He wants to play the hero, but that's the thing. He knows that everything is a game of sorts. The tragedies of his life are principled on this, and just because you refuse to play their game does not mean one isn't playing a game of their own. Even though Delita is on the path of transgression and change, he is still bound by the rules of a game, of a system, and I think he realizes that. It feels like he wants to admit this to Ramza, and almost does in a way, but Delita also knows that it wouldn't change either's path. The true endgame has yet to even reveal itself. Speaking of, in the dark interior of the Cardinal's office, we see 3 men of ill repute discussing their ploys: Gafgarian, Delacroix, and Ludovic. The Cardinal and Dystark have a pact involving the trade of Princess Ovilia, and he has set a trap for our party, 2 birds and a stone, as it were. Gafgarian, as usual, is contemplative and cautious, as he admits, and says it's a risky play, but the Cardinal is sure that it is the right move, and will lay a trail of crumbs to ensure our party gets their due invitation. Gafgarian takes his leave, and the Cardinal takes umbrage with Ludovic and his failures, by killing him horribly. Turnover is high in the business of schemes, apparently. In Belai's Swale, or Belai's Valley, where the first of Saint Ajour's disciples hid from a pursuing ancient empire thousands of years prior, we find our old friend Agrius being pursued by Knights of Lionel. How fitting. Ramza happens upon her, and we help her destroy the pursuing enemy. Again, take care of the archers first if you're playing this ethically and not overleveled like I am, and be careful of the black mages, but otherwise it's an easy map and it should cause little problems. During and after the battle, Agrius informs us of the Cardinal's treachery and that Ovilia was once again captured, and is now readied for execution at Golgotha Gallows. A few miles north of Belai's Swale, our party breaches Golgotha Gallows, an infamous place of death where Saint Ajour was first executed, just in time to witness the preamble to Ovilia's own execution. But as you might have guessed, and as the Cardinal literally just told us, it was a trap all along, and Gafgarian reveals himself as the executioner and the princess as an archer. It's always the goddamn archer. Ramza, ever the gallant fool, falls headfirst into danger, and now we, the player, must dig ourselves out of this bloody hole. This fight is one of the many in the game that teaches you the importance of turns and turn order, and how if you're not careful or if the enemy gets lucky, the fight can very quickly devolve into failure. The archers, yet again, are the prime annoyance here, but Gafgarian should be handled first and foremost if possible, but not without first stealing his very rare equipment, Bloodsword, which is one of the only 2 copies in the entire game. Bloodsword, a somewhat reoccurring weapon in Final Fantasy games, allows whatever damage it inflicts to absorb back as health points. It's quite nice. But once you damage old Gaffy Boy enough, he'll teleport away and leave your units to clean up the rest of the enemy squad. You start the battle with a split party, and 2 of your units hide under the ramparts of the gallows. This is a double-edged sword because it allows any magic units you have to cast spells relatively unimpeded and without having to move much, but this also rings true for the enemy time mages who will annoy you with slow or immobilize, so caution is advised. However, before we remove Gafgarian from the battle, he tells Ramza that Dystark would surely forgive him if he just comes back to Igros, but Ramza denies the plea. Gafgarian reminds Ramza of his house and station, and Ramza wishes no part in this foulness of these plots. Old Gaffy Boy still has some wisdom buried in his ashen mustache, however, and states that blood is the price of progress, and it is the ink which history is writ. I mean, he makes this point on top of Gallows, for God's sake. To wit, a concerted group and effort had to discover the stone, mark and cut the stone, transport the stone, and finally place the stones in such a way to fortify a structure meant to execute people for either being violent criminals or worse, and more probably yet, people of opposition, of unwanted ideas and beliefs, as it were. An industry and system of blood literally surrounds everyone and is a constant reminder of the price of progress. The irony that Ramza cannot fathom yet consistently appalls Gafgarian and previously Argith, for he is a man of blood, of price and penny, and he says Ivalice rots from within. It desires and requires these blood sacrifices, this change, and Ramza's brother is likely to be the delta for this, even if it means to sully his hands in the morality of House Beowulf. It's a sharp truth that cuts deeply, and Ramza will soon realize the price of such scarring. Back at Lionel Castle, Delita washes over Ovilia in a dungeon, begging her to eat. She accuses him of being in league with the Cardinal, but Delita denies it, and so she asks what he would do with her, and he says to put her where she rightly belongs. Ovilia keenly answers back that she's to be used by Delita as well then. Delita rather coldly and accurately tells her she needs to do as he says if she wishes to survive. Before he can explain what that means, the Cardinal and the same Purple Knight from Dorter enter the dungeon. The Cardinal would let her out if she is calmer and more pliable, but the Purple Knight does not play the obsequious host and tells her the dungeon is a perfect place for a false princess. Remember, Ovilia is adopted after all. Ovelia is confused, though, and does not get what he means, so he tells her. The original princess died many years ago, and that Ovelia is and was her double. It was why she was adopted in the first place. He calls her a straw doll, meant to placate the council because they held no love for the queen, and she was a tool used to limit the queen's influence and power. The council plotted and succeeded in killing the queen's 2 eldest sons, as the ailing king was unlikely to have another son, but against all odds he did father another son, the infant Orinus. And in that moment, the council's plot failed, and it was all for naught. However, the Purple Knight seems unfazed by these plots and makes known they hold a trump card, and that there are even bigger stakes at play. They may hold her prisoner, but they do want Ovelia to ascend the throne. The Purple Knight admits they are not of Goltana's banner, nor are they friends to Duke Larg. They are a third party, wholly with their own goals. The Cardinal finally gives name to the Purple Knight, Lord Fulmarv, and says to take their leave until the princess comes around. It appears they are part of the deeper goings-on behind the scenes of this civil war. In the PSP version of Tactics, not only do we receive new units and jobs and a revised script and full motion video cutscenes, we also get new in-game cutscenes that flesh out some motivations for certain characters. One of these is in Linalian Plateau, the place of his sister's death, where we witness Wigraf at the grave of Meluda. Wigraf laments on his impotence as a soldier and failure as a commander and vows vengeance to those that killed her. A blue knight who looks rather similar to Lord Fulmarv interjects and Wigraf draws his blade. However, the blue knight does not wish to cross swords with such a warrior and instead has an offer. He introduces himself as Lofri, and his purpose is to recruit Wigraf into his company's fold. Wigraf thinks him a bounty hunter, but Lofri appeals to the unsettled emotion of Wigraf's losses, of his sister and his Corpse Brigade, and says his group's ambition is to uproot the foundation of Ivalis as well, and see that she is not twice made a slave to nobility. This sounds very familiar. Lofri remarks that Wigraf has spirit and desire and passion burning through him, and that they would welcome such things to their self-same cause. There's that control motif again, and even Wigraf recognizes this and states that he is to be used. Lofri, being a fan of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead as well, it seems, states that every coin has 2 faces, and would it not be prudent to consider the other face? Join them, he tells Wigraf, and their power would be his to wield. Wigraf alone does not have the power to change the world as he wants. Wigraf gazes at the monolith to his failed ambitions, at the grave of his sister, and decides quietly to agree to Lofri's bargain. And so begins our journey to the end of Chapter 2, at the gates of Lionel Castle. Ramza squirrels his way through the gate to the opposite side in order to let his troops move in, but Gafgarian shows up one last time to impede him. This is the first taste of multi-part battles where, if you were like me back in the day and only ever used one save slot, this could be a legit moment of GG, of breaking your progress and forcing you to restart the game entirely because you were unprepared for the fights ahead. That being said, this battle, even in my overpowered state, is a testament to why the tactics subgenre is so desired. It's a bit of masochism mixed with RNG and preparation and a whole lot of trial and error. This fight is tough, no two ways about it. Now, I could use Auto Potion and Dragonheart, or ignore height and or jump, or I could straight up blitz down Gafgarian with pure dual-wielding sword power, or I could just use arithmetics and instantly kill everything, like vanishing and then X-zoning, if you will. But I decided to just leave it as is, at least for the first fight anyway, and come as I am. A wonky team build with little survivability and hope for the best. Since there is nothing rare to steal from Gafgarian this time, I ditched that strategy and just putz around with Ramza as a dual-wielding black mage. Old Gaffy boy will always have the first attack, so you'll start at a disadvantage, but you'll have another option available. To the left of the gate, there is a not-so-noticeable tile that if you end your turn on, will allow you to open the gate and let your other units come in to beat on Gafgarian too. This is the intended tactic, but I ignore it this time around and go 1v1. My dancers and bards brutalize the other enemy knights and archers and summoners, and I mostly toy with them, even if Ramza is getting pieced up by old Gaffy boy. Eventually, I kill Gafgarian for real this time, and we can advance inside the castle proper and to rescue the Princess Ovelia. But wait, there's more, says the PSP version of Final Fantasy Tactics. We get a new battle with Princess Ovelia and Delita back at Zirschel Falls. Ovelia and Delita are on their way to Zeltania to meet up with their mysterious third party. Ovelia remarks that this was the place where Delita first promised to make sure she was never used again as a tool for power. Delita evades this accusation and reminds Ovelia that she really has no choice in the matter. Some knights show up and try to thwart Delita's escape with the princess, so we must do battle. I feel like this was an odd choice of a new battle because it really has no importance on the story or plot, nor is it in any way difficult, and there are only 3 enemy units to kill, and Delita is absurdly more powerful than any of them. Along with Ovilia's godlike protective magic, this fight is perfunctory at best. When I kill the final enemy unit, Delita once again gives Ovilia an ultimatum: bemoan her fate and remain static, or take his hand and live. She really has no other alternative, so she acquiesces. Again, we already knew this, so not really sure why Square decided to include this specific battle, but there we are. After learning some abilities and preparing for the final battle of Chapter 2, I set up my units and get ready for a very tough battle inside Lionel Castle Oratory. Cardinal Delacroix stands behind a stone pulpit, ready to give his final sermon of death, as it were, but not without first jabbing at the memory of Gafkarian and his blustering. Or maybe it's because Ramza is such a badass, even if his stock was thinned by the blood of a whore, he says. Them's fighting words where I come from. However, as if in the Ivelician air, much like Delita, the Cardinal gives us an ultimatum as well, to leave the ore site with him and then leave Lionel, or suffer the consequences. His last such offer. Ramza wants Ovilia all the same, and Delacroix says not will alone can let Ramza have what he's after. Even will requires force, and he has none. Still, the Cardinal tells us to go to Zeltenia, and that Ovilia has accepted this mysterious third party's help, joining their cause. Ramza doesn't believe it, obviously, but the Cardinal tries to sweeten the deal and even asks Ramza to join them, perhaps in a quest for vengeance against his brothers. The Cardinal's group wants to change Ivelisse on the whole, but Ramza does not. He only wants to stop evil where he can. In a rare occurrence of clarity, Ramza denies such a quest as the Cardinal's, and says not even he is as naive to believe he alone can change the world. Our little lad is growing up, ain't he? The Cardinal scoffs at such ridiculous posturing and tells us plainly that the ore site we hold can twist the very weave of nature itself, and he aims to show us. As Cardinal Delacroix holds the blood red stone above his head, dread spirits of the Lucavi circle above him and clamor in ghoulish laughter. Then the spirits swim into the body of the Cardinal, and in a powerful blast of demonic magics, the once portly man of the cloth transforms into a Cronenbergian hellbeast, an even fatter creature from the depths of nightmares. Cuchulainn the Impure. Here it is, the real threat of the game, the true enemy that uses the civil unrest in the kingdom of Ivelisse for its own deleterious ends. And the power is actually real. All the old stories were true. For the first time of many, we are about to battle one of the Lucavi from the time of the Zodiac Braves. And what a battle it is. The music, the sound design, the map, the story and lore implications, and certainly the battle itself. It's the first time in the game where no matter your party level or makeup, Cuchulainn will absolutely wreck you. It's also perfectly expressed and shows that even a slow, laborious genre, such as tactics games are, can still give you the sweaty palms and quickened pulse. So, to start, the placement of your units before the battle can be crucial, depending on your job setup, and even in my Super Saiyan team state, I had to restart the battle twice. Actually, no, 3 times, and change some jobs around, and still barely won by the skin of my teeth. As the battle starts, Cuchulainn will immediately use his multi-target instant ability, Nightmare, that will apply Doom and Sleep, guaranteed to hit unless you have items that prevent these status effects. And he does this by opening his stitched belly, revealing a gaping, gnashing, razor-tooth-filled mouth that screeches profane words as its magic. His opening salvo can potentially win the fight for him instantly, so it's best to have your units placed in such a way that can only really ever target 2 of them at most. I'd suggest using the barrette accessory you could have taken from Ovilia when she was in your party, or the defense armlet, which both prevent sleep, as that's the real party killer here. Doom is annoying, surely, but at least you can still act and put on damage before the timer goes off and kills you. The second of Cuchulainn's abilities that he will use to great effect is Biora, or Biora, or Biora, or Brara, or whatever, which has a few different nasty status effects, one of the worst being Petrify, and he can cast it quickly and basically anywhere on the map. His third ability to round out his nightmarish tool belt is Fallow Heart, a single target ability that disables and stops an enemy unit. This also has effectively an infinite range, so trying to outmaneuver the fat demon is nigh impossible in this fight. Oh, and he packs quite a wallop with his high damage physical attacks too. The best strategy here is to fight fire with fire. If Cuchulainn wishes to win by vicious attrition, then so must we. It's best to not care if a unit needs to be healed or kept alive. We must full press into the fat demon and break him before he breaks us. Sometimes the enemy AI will just toy with you and pick you apart and there's not a goddamn thing you can do about it, but sometimes the enemy AI will go full YOLO and just let you beat on him mercilessly as he aggressively beaches himself at your party's feet. For my final attempt number 5 I think, I decided not to play nice anymore and turned Ramza back into a dual-wielding knight. Cuchulainn has a small HP pool and low physical defense, so it's best to have some heavy hitters on the squad to take him down quickly. In addition to having my lady monk throw heavy hands and my samurai buddy rounding out the team along with my heavy magic hitter, the white/black mage Misses, I eventually bashed that fat demon good until he could no longer take it and died in a blast of demonic magic, going out just as he came in. After the fight in Zeltenia Castle Keep, Delita informs Duke Goltana of the Southern Sky that he has provided him with Princess Ophelia. Delita introduces himself in his bona fides, flanked by the Southern Skies Council and a particular knight known as Cid, and informs the Duke that he has a prisoner with him. A prisoner with information involving a certain plot. The prisoner tells the council there about a turncoat midst their ranks, a close advisor who wants to curry favor with Duke Larg. Chancellor Glavain seems panicked and disavows such heresy and quickly demands the prisoner to be silent. Surprise, surprise, then, that the prisoner names his patron as Chancellor Glavain, and that he gave him the order to capture the princess. Delita, in a performance for the ages, calls out the Chancellor as a traitor. The Chancellor protests, of course, but the evidence speaks for itself, and Delita runs him through, and secures his allegiance to Duke Goltana. I love how Cid also readies his hand on his blade, but in a way that suggests a much calmer demeanor. For, as we will understand in the game at some point, that man Cid could single-handedly take out an army. Delita begs for Duke Goltana to finally take action, and formally declare war on Lazalia, on the Order of the Northern Sky, and so formally begins the War of the Lions, the Great Civil War of Ivalice. Fast forward a bit to Fort Bessalat, and we find Duke Goltana, Thunder God Cid, the Marquis Elmdor de Limberry, the Baron of Bolmina, and Viscount Blanche, all in a meeting to discuss the ongoing civil war. They take inventory of the dead and dying, the wounded, and it seems the toll is heavy on both sides, almost unusually so. Not only does war threaten the land, but drought as well. Because there are little wares to be sold through the Southern Kingdom, taxes are low, and so the coin needed to operate such a war is quickly dwindling. In the Northern Kingdom, excessive rain rotted the crops before harvest, so it seems all sides are beset with death. Not to mention what little work there would be in any case for the common folk. Cid smartly suggests to sue for peace, but Duke Goltana wishes no end to the war, regardless of reason. He even goes as far as to call Cid a coward for such talk. The council agrees with the Duke, and they think the war is almost at an end anyway, so may as well win it. Duke Goltana is disappointed in Cid and his wariness, and there seems to be a growing divide between them. Where would such a well-known hero of the Great 50 Years' War brook quarter, if not in his own kingdom then? If Duke Larg and Duke Goltana are so hell-bent on such a bloody and destructive war, why does this mysterious third party want them to be in conflict so badly? It seems things are spiraling out of control on all fronts, and Ivalice is to bear the weight of it. What vast current propels these plots? Only time and blood will tell. We begin Chapter 3 of the game by buying some fresh gear and making sure our units are up to snuff, in addition to going around to every town, castle, port, and completing various tavern missions. Eventually, I think by the end of Chapter 3, I won't be overleveled anymore, so the game's difficulty curve will be more or less the intended pace. I'm trying to juice my units up as much as I can because I want to use the only non-story characters as much as I can, so I want to make them as viable and therefore strong as I can. The game will feed you a very few powerful story units, as I mentioned before, and you could easily end up only using those units and never anyone else, so to make the game a bit more interesting, I will avoid that as much as possible. And speaking of powerful story units you encounter, our first map of Chapter 3 is with one of these very units, at the snow-laced rooftops of the mining town Goland. This is quite the important city, as we will discover later in the game, and will be a pivotal point in one of the game's biggest side quests. But for now, we are to attempt a sort of rescue of a young man, a young astrologer by the name of Orin Durai. Hey, there's that name again. Remember way back about an hour and a half ago when I mentioned that our curator and de facto narrator's name was also Durai? Well, here he is, the an undisclosed number of greats' great-grandfather. Orin is being chased by a gang of thieves after it seems he's been poking around in their hideout. For what, we don't know, but we happen upon him as he escapes and the enemy units decide we need to die as well. Hot off the battle with a literal demon god, these paltry knaves have no idea what's about to happen to them. I mean, not only is my party steeled with resolve and mettle and power, but Orin is about as busted and OP of a character that this game has on offer. He's an astrologer, a unique job that only he has, and he has one ability that is absurdly powerful. And when I saw it for the first time, way back in the late 90s, my little kid mind ran with thought as I wondered when and if I was ever going to be able to recruit him or get his job at some point. Rightfully though, Squaresoft recognized that despite units like Sid or Beowulf, or Ramza for that matter, some things are just beyond the pale, some things are just too much to give away. Orin has an ability called Galaxy Stop, the original name for the PlayStation guys, or Celestial Stasis, the new name for the PSP players, and it is just simply ridiculous. Not only is it relatively fast, not too fast though, it can hit every enemy on the map, much like a dancer or mathematician can, and inflicts 3 extremely debilitating status effects. Stop, don't act, and don't move. Or in other words, stop, disable, and immobilize. It's just crazy that such an ability exists in-game, and this is, for obvious reasons, one of my favorite battles in the game. Not only is the spell effect pretty cool when it hits, you just have to laugh at how easy the battle becomes. Also, Orin's gold and black sprite is fantastic, so there's simply no downside to this map and battle. In addition to our first meeting of a truly OP character in battle, we are also introduced to our first meeting of the book weapon type as well as the mediator job, whom also uses a book as a weapon. For knowledge is power. Take a look, it's in a book. The book is a mid-ranged weapon type that allows a unit to bypass a lot of height requirements for attacks by beating down their enemies with pure logic and facts. Technically, I was already exposed to this as some shops sell books and rugs and bags, and yes, these are weapon types in the game. Apparently, someone at Squaresoft must have had a very traumatic experience in a library at some point. But it's the first time in the game where the enemy will use them. In any case, after the battle ends, Ramza and Orin exchange info, and Orin seems surprised by the last name of Ramza, which suggests he may know of him, but either way, they part ways and wish each other good fortune, and we can move north into the royal city of Lazalia, the high seat and capital of Ivalice. In Lazalia, we find Zalbag Beowulf, Lord Brother and Arc-Knight, and leader of the Northern Sky. Reading or studying in a private library within the castle, he's surprised to see Ramza all the way in Lazalia, and also states that Alma is there as well, and Ramza should see her. Ramza, however, is on a mission of morality, and attempts to deter Zalbag from war once again, stating how their house is built on justice and not glory, such as this civil war seems to be about, and that there seems to be a hidden hand among the war. Zalbag doesn't like the insinuation and denies Ramza's appraisal, and becomes indignant at the accusation of treachery within his own house and from his own brother no less. Zalbag even goes as far as to insult Ramza and his common blood mother, seems to be a common jape against him, and says he is no brother of his and that Ramza should head back to Egros if he knows what's good for him. Ramza is taken aback by the hostility, but before the argument can continue, a knight from the Northern Sky rushes in to tell the Lord Commander that Thunder God Sid has broken their lines at Dugera Pass. Zalbag must summon his war council and then leaves to play commander. I suspect that Zalbag reacts so strongly to the allegations against his brother and Duke because not only does it stain the memory of their stalwart and just father and the true justice their house has always stood for, but he himself had been having these thoughts and suspicions, and the truth always hits hard and cold, especially when you don't want to face it. In the back of the castle, the postern, Ramza attempts to leave without having talked to his sister Alma, but Alma finds him before he can. Ramza has never been good at goodbyes and so relents and tells Alma of the goings-on. He tells her that Delita lives and that he is part of something that is of neither side of the Civil War, something perhaps more dangerous still. Alma is no dummy either and suspects that Dystarg indeed ordered the failed abduction, and then asks about Tietra. Ramza admits to her death, and Alma is beside herself. That was her best friend, remember. Ramza also admits that Delita serves a purpose that is unknown to him, and he doesn't believe what he is doing without reasons. That's not who or what Delita is. Alma correctly guesses that Ramza is on the path of justice, and so decides to follow in his footsteps and join Ramza's cause. Ramza protests, of course, but not before a man of Glabados enters the scene. High Confessor Zalmor of the Holy Inquisition has been tasked to take the heretic Ramza on charges of murder of the Cardinal Delacroix. Oh yeah, that bit. While technically true, Ramza has no intention of going into the custody of the obviously corrupt church, and so denies such a request. To the church, however, resisting arrest is tantamount to pleading guilty and therefore means a just and quick execution is wholly appropriate. Backing the High Confessor are some holy monks and knights, and suddenly we are thrust into battle. Our goal is to just damage the High Confessor enough so he teleports away, which isn't too hard, but the old man has quite a bit of powerful white magics in his arsenal, and so if you're not careful and you decide to rag on the other units instead of Zalmor, you might find yourself in a Sisyphusian uphill battle which will eventually end in defeat. So, go hard on Zalmor as soon as possible and the fight will be much more manageable. But as it is, I toy with the units as long as possible, turning some into crystals so I can absorb and learn some of their job abilities, and really have no trouble at all with this map. During the fight, Zalmor says we are heretics to commit such heinous acts against the church, but Ramza attempts to explain that it was all a deceit from the outset, and that the church is corrupt by an ancient magical evil, the Lucavi. Zalmor, being a true believer, denies such audacity, and calls for the name of Baal to be washed away in tears. That point might have more truth in it than either realize. After the battle, Ramza and Alma discuss the aura site, and she says she may have seen one of these stones in Orbone Monastery. She will show Ramza, but she must be allowed to stay with him in the interim. Ramza protests, of course, but Alma points out that she's probably considered an apostate or heretic as well, and she may as well join their party. Besides, how else would he even get close to Orbone without her help, considering Ramza is pursued and branded a criminal too? Fair is fair, and so we make our way back to Orbone Monastery. But first, I must go around the entire map and do all the tavern missions at all the towns and cities and upgrade my units. This may take a while and does, especially if you're doing it without save states, but lucky for me and this video, it will magically only take a few seconds or a minute at most. It's like time traveling, but only for you. At Orbone Monastery, we begin the first of a 3-battle sequence. In the first level of the vaults, where one of the Zodiac Stones is supposedly kept, Elder Simon takes a nap with his fellow white mages, but wakes up just in time and lets us know that men have come looking for the stone. The Virgo stone was indeed housed here, and it was a stone of royal lineage, given as proof that the foster child of Villia was of royal blood. Ramza correctly guesses why he is branded a heretic. It is because he possesses some of these holy stones, and the church, for whatever reason, want them badly. Elder Simon reveals that High Confessor Marcel wishes to restore the church to prominence with these stones. He says the church has been orchestrating the conflict between Goltana and Larg to whittle down their military power. Surprised Pikachu face. Marcel and the church wish to re-establish themselves as the de facto power in Ivalice by weakening the crown and winning the people over. Oh, and by infusing themselves with the unholy magic power of the Lucavi. Don't forget that little bit. Ramza tasks Alma with hiding and protecting Elder Simon. In response, Alma wishes she was a man in this moment, to charge into battle with Ramza at her side. However, Ramza just steamrolls over this rather delicate and powerful realization by saying it's nonsense, and that what would he do without his little sister? Ah, to be a woman in feudal times, eh? There's that control and agency theme again, rearing its sizable and ugly head. On to the second level of the monastery vaults, our first battle. A Green Knight Templar named Isolde, whose sprite looks very much like Lord Folmar of Enlofri, commands his units to hold this passage as he searches for the stone in the farthest recesses of the monastery. And just in time too, our party shows up and decides to crash the enemy's position. This fight is actually pretty tough. The enemy units consist of 3 lancers, dragoons for you Final Fantasy fanboys out there, and 1 chemist and 2 additional time mages at the bottom of the vault steps. Because the battlefield is so stratified, magic users are at a particular advantage here, considering their magic can ignore height issues on this map, and so the time mages will become quite annoying. This is the first map that shows off the power of lancers as well. Their job's ability allows them to jump in the air and land on enemy's head like Mario, and inflict high physical damage. The tactical and strategic part comes from the fact that the jump ability isn't immediate, and that the unit will sort of hang in the air and disappear from the battlefield for a time until their action can be completed, and they'll crash back down into the earth. Basically, it makes the unit invulnerable to damage and can be used quite effectively as a defensive tactic as well as an offensive one. This is nothing new. This has been the staple of the jump command in most of, if not all, of Final Fantasy games. But in Final Fantasy Tactics' particular combat system, one must first target a tile or a space on the map. This means that a unit could move out of the jump landing zone and not take damage, or it can mean that a unit can enter the same targeted tile space and then get hit by jump. It's a high risk, high reward kind of tactic, but in this particular battle, these Lancers will pump out some serious damage to my party, so I will need to be careful. Obviously, the jump command pairs very well with Time Mage's Immobilize magic, hence why this enemy team makeup is rather effective, and the fight itself pretty difficult. That being said, I eventually deal with them all after some clutch raises and revives, and then I win the battle. In the third level of the Monastery Vaults, Isilud calls us mongrels and Ramza a heretic, and that he will have the stones we carry. Ramza gives him the same ultimatum, but he scoffs at that, and so we do battle. During the fight, Isilud asks Ramza why he persists in such foolish resistance, for he is a Beowulf, but Ramza retorts it is because he is a Beowulf that he persists. His name stands for truth and justice and the American way. No, wait, sorry, that's a different game. His family fought the 50 Years' War for the exact same reason he now stands in opposition of the crown and church, to deny the corruption and self-serving aristocracy. Isilud suggests Ramza join them, for they fight for the same goals. Isilud thinks the Church of Glabados envisions a world devoid of hierarchy and class, where all men are equal. And considering the realization of Alma in the previous scene, this expressed desire seems particularly empty, or at least misguided. He says Saint Ajora said this exact same thing eons past and names him, which is odd again considering we know she's a woman. Religion and facts name a better combo, yeah? Isilud wants to reclaim the course of Ivalice, but Ramza rightly says it is his group that churned the waves of this conflict. Isilud, like any good devotee of a cause, immediately suggests martyrdom as the proper course of action, and that revolution requires it, that the crown and old ways of life are rotten. He asks once again for Ramza to join their cause, as Delita has, but Ramza does not answer him directly. He instead suggests that they want, and by extension what anybody in their stead would want, is power, and power that beyond an army even. They would free the people just to enslave them again via demonic magic. Seems quite the stretch to claim that as emancipation from corruption. It seems to be the definition of it, if anything. However, Isilud still believes the stones are of God and that they are vessels for divinity. Ramza denies Isilud's notion and says the cardinal was changed into one of these Lucavi, but Isilud rebukes Ramza's counterclaim. And so goes the carousel of true believers, of the circular thought of delusion and dogma. Though it matters not, for soon there will be a reckoning and the truth will be known. When we weaken Isilud enough, he flees and the battle will end. This fight is also quite hard. If your units do not have enough jump and move stats, the winding paths of the narrow vault archways will force the enemy to whittle you down without you even being able to touch them. Not only is there an annoying archer you must deal with, but the hard-hitting monks and knights round out the even harder-hitting Isilud. Because all you have to do is weaken Isilud to end the battle, the best defense is of course a good offense, so going full press on him is advisable. But if you have enough defensive magics and feel like having some masochistic fun, you can try and chew through the enemy units one by one until only Isilud is left, like I opted to do for whatever reason. Sometimes we gotta make our own fun where we can. And now we are at our final battle, at the place where we started, the first level of the Monastery Vaults. As is the constant refrain for these three battles, this one is also very tough. Isilud has captured Alma, it seems, and wouldn't you know it, our old adversary Wiegraf has shown up and orders Isilud to take the girl and go. Wiegraf at least shows us the proper respect and says not to be deceived by Ramza's youth, that he is indeed a worthy foe. Boy, is this battle quite the pickle. Looking back on it, this battle really is the preamble to the final fight with Wiegraf a bit later. It should teach you how to position your units so as not to die in the opening gambit, as well as reaffirming that Wiegraf's such devastation is indeed his intention, and that you must respect the enemy. Wiegraf will hit at least 2 of your units right off the bat, there's no way around that, so you must position them in a way that allows minimal damage and easy restoration. Hopefully he won't stop any of your units because this will effectively lose the battle before you can even get to issue any commands. After Wiegraf uses Stasis Blade on a couple of our units, he converses with Ramza. Ramza calls Wiegraf a thrall of the church doing its bidding, an ignoble end for such a iconoclast as he was. Wiegraf disabuses Ramza of this notion, saying he knows nothing of his dreams and ambitions. Only power can realize such dreams, power that he now possesses. Such biting words are succor to him, it matters not. Ramza will have no choice but to yield to such power, and if by that he means that I have to restart the fight a few times, rearrange some units and jobs and whatnot, then yes, you are right, Wiegraf. I will have to succumb to such power. Flanking Wiegraf are, yet again, of course, a couple of archers who will snipe at you from the thin doorways on either side of the map, and a couple of black mages who pack quite the punch, so this fight in all ways is quite the battle. If you wish to go after units and crystal them for their sweet, sweet, delicious job ability juices, this fight will be exceptionally difficult as you'll have to evade and tank and heal from Wheatgraft's Holy Knight onslaught. Not to mention the constant heavy barrage from the archers and black mages. It's a very claustrophobic fight as well. Thin alleyways and even thinner openings to egress, there's just not much room to run or outflank anyone. Fighting will happen, and it will be done in close quarters and with haste. So even here, it is best to fight fire with fire, press hard into Wheatgraft to end the fight as soon as possible. Most likely you will lose some units, so you have to end the battle before they turn into crystals, and therefore don't feel bad about throwing your units into the wood chipper to just squeeze out a little more damage where you can. This tactic will be employed in many more battles, mind you, so best to get used to that now and forgive yourself for the wanton disregard of your party. After finally damaging Wheatgraft enough, he flees and the battle is won, and we witness a rather sad scene outside the entrance to Orbone Monastery. Outside the monastery, Isilud holds Alma atop Chocobo, very reminiscent of Gragoroth and Tietra, if you remember, and a prone, bleeding, dying Wheatgraft orders for Isilud to escape with her. On a quick note, I love how Wheatgraft's portrait is now bleeding from the mouth and head, a very Doom-like addition that adds a lot of character, I think. Again, the original PlayStation had severe memory limits and therefore limited ways the developer could design the game. So to even see just a little ketchup on the side of Wheatgraft's mouth really does add to the feel and immersion of the scene. Perhaps it's just me, but I do enjoy the subtle and small details sometimes more than anything else. Regardless, Wheatgraft once again laments his impotence as a soldier and asks for Maluda's forgiveness. It is a bitter drink to swallow for such a man as he, so much left undone and may be forgotten. As he slumps over, the Zodiac Stone spills from his coat and falls beyond his reach. Then, the stone lifts into the air above either Ramza and Wheatgraft, and shines, and then speaks. The voice calls him a god stone bearer, and asks for treaty. The flesh and stone will become as one, forever alive and immutable. The stone seems to react strongly to the emotion of the moment. It comes alive from the ire and despair of Wheatgraft, of its bearer. At the same moment as Wheatgraft agrees to the stone's want, Ramza pleads with Wheatgraft not to. But it is too late. The Gigas Belias has answered the desire of its bearer, and so imbues Wheatgraft with the fearsome power of the Lucavi, transforming the once proud man into a currish, four-armed hell beast with horns. Wheatgraft, or Belias as it is now, finally understands the power of the Orsight, power that can truly change things. He now sees with eyes thousands of years old. The Wheatgraft we knew is now gone, or more accurately, has ascended into something new and terrifying. Belias teleports away after he laughs at Ramza when he draws his blade. Elder Simon then crawls from within the monastery to give us a book, the Book of Germanique, one of Saint Ajora's apostles. Elder Simon repents as he knows his end is near, and says he lived a life of sin knowing that the church rotted from within as he turned a blind eye to it. The book may expose the church for its misdeeds, and indeed save Alma from their twisted goals. In his last bittersweet breath, Elder Simon remarks how Ramza truly is the spitting image of young Barbaneth, Ramza's father. At Trade City Dorter, rain soaks the streets as Ramza moves through them. Suddenly, a young man blocks Ramza's path. He identifies himself with the church and says if he wants Alma back, he must come to Riovane Castle with the heretical scriptures of Germanique. And with that, the young man disappears and we find ourselves with a new path to tread.
So here you are. They've been searching high and low for you. I do hope this day finds your Royal Highness in better spirits than those past.
Do not mock me. Please. I could not bear it.
That was cruel of me. I'm sorry.
What do you mean to do with me? I am not Ovelia. There can be no value in holding me. No value even in my living.
You're right. You are not the Princess Ovelia. We do not even know your rightful name. Whether even you be highborn or low.
I had often wondered. Of the royal family, be confined to a remote monastery, so far removed from the seat of our crown. Even this I thought a burden light enough, if it meant the kingdom would know peace. I played my part, yet still Ivalice runs red with blood. All this suffering and solitude. For what?
It has been the same for me. I was given the wardrobe of a nobleman, and so I played the part, a puppet ever dancing for the amusement of patrons unseen. This wretched world does not reward endeavor. It is the patron and his troop who are receipt. Maggots grown fat on endeavor's course. Most men but play the part they're given. Most live and die not knowing they play a part at all. But I am past all that now. I am their unwitting puppet. No more! No more. I will exact from them the price of their gluttonous feast!
And just what is it you plan to do to them?
I will burn down this kingdom, and from its ashes build for you a new one, a kingdom worthy of you. I will show you a world where your light will outshine the sun, a world that will know no darkness. And you will have no more need of tears.
Such a world, is it possible?
I will not fail you in this. On Titra's soul, I swear it to you. Dry your tears.
Ovelia plays the princess in the tower well enough, but she desires it no further, and Delita is one of the same mind. Because Ovelia reminds him so much of his dead sister Tietra, he promises all things he could never have given her to Ovelia instead. From deep trauma and personal loss, the realm of Ivalice will forever be changed. True, there may be an existential apocalyptic threat, as is the wont in such video games and fantasy stories, but the motivation for such enduring change is to come from those that need and wish it the most, and not from those that simply feast on the meals of others and benefit sight unseen. Alone, Delita and Ovelia seem to have an accord, a pact, to wrest the reins of fate back into the hands of the common man. Still, Delita must play his part, as it is too soon to enact such goals or indeed even be able to see them clearly. Much still needs to be done. Ramza continues his journey back to Zaklaw's desert into a new battle, a new character, and a new side quest, all exclusive to the PSP version of Final Fantasy Tactics.
You'll never be able to outrun them. If it's dinner you're after, I'll feed you a length of iron. Have it your way then. Let's see how you swallow this.
Here we are introduced to Luso, a young man with the job of game hunter. Luso is probably the best poacher in the game. The poach ability allows a unit to kill a monster/beast and obtain their pelt in order to trade for valuable items in some of the town's shops. And because the game hunter job has the implicit ability of poach, it frees up a passive slot, thus making Luso inherently better at poaching than any other unit. Some of you may recognize the little yellow and red scamp as the main character from Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, the Game Boy Advance series of Final Fantasy Tactics. And while that game may not be as deep or impressive as the PlayStation variant, it was still quite the fun game, and I sunk hundreds of hours into that as well, which for a mobile game at the time in the early aughts was quite impressive. In addition to the poach implicit, Luso's Game Hunter job also has all the default abilities that Ramza has, which means Luso can learn Ultima eventually as well. The battle at Ziclaw's Desert is actually kind of fun because you can get some seriously powerful equipment if you let Luso poach all the behemoths, especially the Behemoth King and Dark Behemoth, the tan one and dark blue one respectively. One of these being the Stone Shooter, a gun that spits out random magic and can pump out a lot of damage, as well as a late game bow, the Artemis bow. If you can, let Luso go on murdering, but be warned, because he is a guest AI, he will do dumb shit and will not do what you want him to do, so patience and a white mage is a virtue here. I don't really care about the gear because I'm trying to curb some of the power I have, but also because the gun and bow can be collected later in higher random battles and from deep dungeon. So I don't really push as hard and long as I can to let Luso poach and end the battle rather quickly. After the battle, Luso formally joins our ranks, if you decide to let him, that is, and we can be on our way to the next story mission. On a quick, small, spoilery note, there are quite a few secret characters in the game, and at least 3 of them are literally from different Final Fantasy games. There's Balthier, Luso, and Cloud, and yep, that Cloud, the one and only. In addition to those 3, we also have Beowulf, Reese, and Construct 8, but those 3 are germane to this game at least. This was a common practice back in the early days of Final Fantasy and RPGs in general that has fallen out of favor, unfortunately. In fact, in some older Final Fantasy games, certain characters were so secret that you could very easily never encounter them and essentially wonder why you kept getting weapons that none of your other characters could even use. Yuffie, I'm looking at you. In any case, Ramza and company move on to Grog Heights, the largest farm belt in Lazalia region, which, if you remember, has been beset by heavy rain and has sullen a lot of the crops that were bound for harvest and for the capital. And wouldn't you know it, it's raining as we arrive. We crash into some deserting soldiers. Again, the war is far too expensive and ongoing, and there is a lot of desertion and relocation going on, whom recognize us as the branded heretics and decide to turn us in for the bounty and to reclaim their honorable discharge, and to evade any punishment for their desertion, I'd expect. This map is fantastic. It's open and easy and allows a great number of jobs to shine here. It's a great map to practice and to balance any mods for folks to cook up from the original game. And yes, there are quite the number of mods for Final Fantasy Tactics that deserve a whole 10-hour critique in and of themselves, but that's really for the diehards and would be beyond the pale for this video. And trust me, you can't call yourself a nerdy diehard unless you've at least played 1.3 and watched the dozens of YouTube videos of AI parties duking it out in player-run tournaments. I'm not saying you have to, but give it a shot. You might find it fun, and it's a small but passionate subculture of the community, if you're into that sort of thing anyway. Regardless, Grog Heights is a chill and easy battle, and it ends rather quickly. After the battle, however, we are treated to a scene where Ramza meets up with Auron once again, the absurdly OP astrologer from a while back. He's mounted on a chocobo, and Ramza discerns the black line on his armor and acknowledges that he is of the southern sky of Gultana. Auron is surprised a Beowulf would help their side, but also admits that the reason they hunt the deserters is not out of enmity, but duty. Ramza asks if he recognized him in their last meeting, and Auron says yes, he saw the bill from the church and his face on it. He laughs and wonders what possible thing Ramza could have done to attain the church's ire so. Ramza asks Auron if he is to turn him in then, but Auron has no interest in heretics and he does not wish to harm Ramza. Ramza asks why he still fights then. Auron says, so long as swords are drawn, he and his people must fight. It's as simple as that. They are duty and honor bound. Ramza then feels safe enough to request a message to be brought to Count Orlandu, Thunder God Cid that is, and there are unseen hands that goad either side to further war, and that his father, the late king, once trusted Cid with his life, and was the only man he could call a true friend. Auron tells us that he is the adopted son of the Count, and that he promises to pass on this message. So that's why he's absurdly OP, like father like son apparently. Ramza guesses correctly that Auron, and thus Cid, know of the High Confessor's plot, but Auron says they have no hard evidence, and so action is stalled. Ramza may have that evidence on him, the heretical Germanique scriptures, but smartly does not divulge that to Auron, and instead says he simply wishes to know if they would lay down their arms if such evidence existed. Auron is pressed to continue their march by his soldiers, and so Auron gives us one last piece of advice. Ramza does have friends, and those friends would fight for his cause if need be. including himself. Ramza thanks him, and we continue our journey onto Riovane Castle. Our next battle is at the walled city of Yardro, a 10-century-old city surrounded by thick stone walls. Here we see the same mysterious man who tasked us to head to Riovane Castle arguing with a young woman, both clad in white. Merrick, the man, and the one he argues with, the woman called Rafa, seem to be on opposite sides. Rafa apparently wishes to leave the employ of their caretaker, whom uses both of them as assassins, and begs with Merrick to leave with her. To further complicate things, their caretaker is also their adoptive father. Quite a lot of adoption going on in the lands of Ivalice, it seems. And so to suggest abandonment is to suggest sedition. Duke Barrington had opened his heart and home to them, and to repay him as such is folly. Rafa tries to snap Merrick out of it and reminds him that the Duke is the one that set fire to their village in the first place, making them orphans. And the only reason Duke Barrington did that and adopted the two siblings was so he could use them and their unusual magical abilities to further his own ends. Merrick slaps Rafa and denies her ill-mannered tongue. He's in too deep, and the shock of the truth has yet to raise him from his stupor, so he takes his frustrations out on his sister. I wonder where he learned that behavior, Then Rafa mentions the thing that the Duke did to her, but Merrick can't listen to it and refuses to believe it. Just then a ninja appears and gives word to Merrick that Ramza's party draws near. As our party enters the scene, Rafa runs to us and begs for aid, and so we accept and must protect Rafa from the wrath of Merrick and his ninja and summoners. Rafa and Merrick are unique in their jobs, Hell Knight and Heaven Knight as they were called in the PlayStation version, but as mages with unusual power, so are their magics unusual. Not only do they possess the only alternate elemental magics in the game, earth element, water element, wind element, etc., the way the siblings employ this magic is through RNG. Like axes and bags, their magics have a range of damage that can happen. The magic targets random tile spaces within its spell field and with a random number of hits, up to a maximum of 10. So, theoretically, you could have up to 10 999 damage hits in one turn, making them the most powerful units by a long country mile. But that happens about as often as winning the lottery on your birthday, so these two siblings tend to be on the weaker end of the power scale in this game. Because instead of 10 uber hits at once, you could literally completely miss the enemy unit and cast the spell only once. Ouch. Still, if you like frustration and slot machines, you'll love the Sky Seer and Nether Seer jobs. Still, even with their unusual magic, I beat Merrick down and his little ninja buddies, and win the fight. Behind the walls of Yardro, Rafa tells us about Duke Barrington and about Riovane Castle. The Duke has eyes for the throne, and even goes as far as to call himself King of the Forge, as he continues to amass arms and soldiers within his walls. But Ramza tells Rafa that the Duke does so because he is part of an order that would depose Larg and Goltana for their own ends, and install the Duke as regent. Rafa asks why Ramza fights, and he once again says it is because his name says he must, for he is a Beowulf. But Ramza sees past that and says it is because Ramza sees injustice and evil, and he is compelled to act. It is in his nature. Ramza asks what about Rafa, and she tells him their story. Ramza remarks that the Duke was a great man who erected many orphanages throughout Ivalice, but it was of course for ulterior motives. He wished to groom these children into assassins for his own gain. Rafa admits that their people, the Galthenas, were keepers of their sacred art, their unusual magics, passed down through generations, and that her brother and her were conduits of the heaven and of the nether, and they channeled such power by mantra. Duke Barrington wanted that power too, and when their village elder refused to acquiesce, the Duke burned their village down, killing everyone there. He's an all-or-nothing, scorched earth kind of guy. Rafa had recently learned of the Duke's obfuscation and misdeeds, and that he even went as far as to sexually accost Rafa, because everything is a toy to be used in the Duke's eyes, even his own adoptive children. Even though Ramza meant it in regards to the younger orphans, he says it is unfortunate that such a man of his station would prey upon the weak, looking directly at Rafa, even though Rafa and Merrick are some of the most powerful mages ever, and hold a secret form of magic that is replicated by none other in all of Ivalice. Ramza still is awkwardly blunt and insensitive in his philosophical musings. Look, he's not the best at the social game, but he tries, okay? Then, a remote-controlled talking frog enters the scene. Boy, we really are in a Final Fantasy game after all, and tells Ramza and Rafa to head to Riovane Castle if Ramza ever wishes to see Alma again. Oh, and then the frog blows up. Anyway, we get a bonus fight after that with Princess Ovilia and Delita back in Zeltenia Castle Chapel ruins. Princess Ovilia prays by herself and Delita comes by to collect her before nightfall, but then intercepts a shuriken meant for Ovilia. 2 ninjas appear under the orders of Duke Larg, and we must kill them to save the princess. Again, while I appreciate the fact that I get to play as Delita, there are only 2 enemy units, and I one-shot either of them easily, so it's effectively an interactive cutscene. Still, the whole point of the scene is to reaffirm that Delita may play the part for Cortana or whomever else, but he is still being honest and truthful with Ovilia, and really does wish to protect her and what she stands for. I think there's a reason why Delita is a golden knight and not a traditional white knight. The ambition colors him too much. He may believe what he says, but his actions are often at odds with his words or intentions. Still, words are meaningless without action, so really, is anything ever pure? Is anything ever wholly absolved of personal ambition or gain? One does good not only because it is such and because people are grateful, but because it makes one feel good too. Regardless of reason, goodness is colored by the ambition or wants of the self in every instance. I suppose the game is asking if that's enough of a reason to use someone or something, or must it be all or nothing? Can even such a thing exist in the first place? We shall find out. At the next node, the next map, we must cross through the haunted Yugwood to reach Riovane Castle. After some quick tavern missions and outfitting our units, we enter the Yugwood and must do battle with various ghosts and undead units. These ghosts are actually spirits of those that fell in the Battle of the 50 Years' War, and they are indeed ornery. This battle is genuinely a tough one if you don't go for the petrify or seal evil tactic, and even if you do, because the map is on the smaller side, the ghosts and other powerful undead human units will bunker your party pretty easily, and you will not have a fun time. In fact, I had to restart the battle because I didn't respect the threat of teleporting ghosts and their ability to long-range throw their ectoplasm from basically anywhere and pump out damage at a rapid pace. Regardless, I eventually whittle the ghostly threat down to nothing and break through the undead warriors of the 50 Years' War, and finally move on to another 3-part battle and to the end of Chapter 3. And whew, are these 3 battles quite the doozy, let me tell you. When I was a kid, growing up in the 90s, I lived in a town called Walnut Creek. And in this then small town, there was a wonderful deli called Geneva Delicatessen, which was right next door to another wonderful Italian pizza joint called Sorrento's, and both are still there as far as I know. And during the summers, I would ride my bike from my house, which was about a mile away, and I would purchase one of the best sourdough roast beef sandwiches that I still think about to this day. And as I ate my summer lunch, I would read one of the many Prima or Brady official game guides to whatever game I might have rented that weekend, or was lucky enough that my mom had bought me, and I would study that book like it was for the SATs and I was trying to get into an Ivy League school. And for one summer, I was playing, wouldn't you know it, Final Fantasy Tactics for the first time. Now, I did not own the guide to Final Fantasy Tactics when I first played, and as I eventually got to the last 3 missions of Chapter 3, as you might have guessed, I came up against a wall. I realized that no matter what, I just could not beat one certain fight. I mean, I tried everything I could think of, every trick I had at my disposal, but it just simply was not enough. So, I begged my mom to go to the mall one weekend, and we went into Babbage's, and I scoured the shelves, and I found the guidebook I was looking for. Surely here my answers would be found. My mother reluctantly agreed to purchase it, thankfully, and so the next day my little legs pedaled harder than they ever pedaled before, and I ordered another delicious sourdough roast beef sandwich, and sat outside in Geneva's wire-framed tables and chairs, and I read that Prima tome in search for answers. Eventually, I found the battle described in the book. I found out what I needed to do. And it was in this moment that my heart sank, and the delicious roast beef in my mouth turned to ashes. Even the soothsayers and seers of Prima guidebooks had no out for me. There was nothing I could do. There was no help coming. There was no cavalry on the hill. I understood in that moment that I was, for lack of a better term, boned. Royally even. I sat back in the wire mesh chair, and I remember this distinctly, and I listened to the birds chirp above me and their maple trees, the cars putter by on Treat Boulevard, the few adult patrons in their ties and pantsuits shuffling back to work, brown bags in hand, and I felt a deep sadness, or more accurately, it was lassitude, a broad and defining emptiness of energy that washed over me. Time is a wonky concept, especially to the young, and even though it was only about 25 hours worth of work, a long weekend of gaming to me now, it was in reality weeks of playing, weeks of thinking about it at school or football practice or on the toilet. It was the first time I understood the concept of reward versus outcome. Despite the cheery song of cardinals above my head, I knew despair was soon to follow. I knew the only option was the nuclear kind. I would have to restart the game over entirely. Crying or arguing or denying. I had to. It was as simple as that. I didn't even finish my delicious sourdough roast beef sandwich. I left everything on the wire mesh table and listlessly pedaled back home. I knew it had to be done, and so I did it. Before the brutal 3-part battle of Riovane Castle proper, we view a cutscene with Duke Barrington, Lord Folmarv, and Wiegraf. The Duke mentions that a castle is never as pretty as when it is dressed for war, and wouldn't it be nice if the seat of the crown knew such beauty too? Lord Folmarv wonders what he was called for, and the Duke says it was because their party holds the true power, not Goltana or Larg, but the ones with the Zodiac Stones, and the Duke would want that power. Folmarv attempts to misdirect the Duke's understanding, but the Duke does not bite. The Duke wonders why they pursue Ramza, but Folmarv says his company, the Knights Templar, do not share orders with the Inquisitors of the Church, and so know nothing about it. The Duke denies such obfuscation, however, and orders Merrick into the room where Isolde, the son of Lord Folmarv, has been captured, and thus told the Duke of their plans. Folmarv does not take to Isolde's capture well, so Duke Barrington extorts an alliance, a mutually beneficial accord between the Knights Templar and his forces, or he would expose the Church for their plots. Even Goltana and Larg may band together under such seditious activities, so it would be best to see the Church remain clandestine. However, Folmarv orders Wiegraf to catch up to Merrick and says that he will deal with Duke Barrington personally. It seems Folmarv is unfazed by such threats of mere humans, that is. Thunder cracks outside, and Lord Folmarv reverses the threat onto Duke Barrington instead. The Duke's knights surround Folmarv and Isolde, but they know not of what horror is about to transpire. A golden light hues between Folmarv's tabard, and the Zodiac Stone he holds beckons to power. Okay, so the first battle is at Riovane Castle Gate. This isn't too hard, but yet again, the archers at the top of the ramparts will make mincemeat of your units. So, I'd suggest using Archer's Bane reaction ability, or the Reflexes reaction ability, which will eliminate arrow attacks completely or give a very high chance at evading them, respectively. Merrick joins the archers at the top of the castle gates, and he and Rafa share words. Rafa begs Merrick to come to his senses and leave the Duke, but he refuses again, saying that turncloaks would never find quarter and would be pursued relentlessly. He says the Duke granted them one last mission to destroy Ramza and recover the Germanic scriptures, and then he would set them free, but Rafa isn't as naive and attempts to say as much. In any case, once we damage Merrick or Rafa enough, they both teleport away, and we have to clean up the other units to end the fight and progress. The one hidden floating knight in the waterway of the castle has geomancy and, as he did to me, can basically end the fight immediately by turning one of your units, in my case Ramza, into a frog. Frog status in the game basically makes you insanely weak, and all you can do is lick things to death, so it's more or less a death sentence. The knights hit hard, Merrick hits hard, and of course the archers hit hard, so large HP pools or correct defensive reaction abilities are required here if you don't want to have a bad time. The map is big too, so don't feel bad about a strategic retreat, let the enemy come to you, a classic strategy in most tactics games, by the way. Dancers are particularly effective in large maps with units that can't move too well, so keep that in mind as well. Still, persist and keep your units alive enough, and you will win the battle as I did. Back in Riovane Dungeon, Alma waits. Hearing a commotion outside, Alma wonders what's going on. Soon, a bloodied and battered knight bursts through her cell door. He warns of a hellbeast on the loose, and tells Lady Alma to save herself. Not one to lightly take an opportunity, Alma watches the brave knight die, and then she flees from her dungeon cell. And here it is, the fight that ended 1,000 save files. In Riovane Castle Keep, Ramza remarks on the ghoulish violence surrounding him, the blood and death that permeates. Something dark has happened here, something wicked. Wiegraf stands atop the stone steps of the keep, around the countless dead knights he has slain, and orders Ramza to draw his blade. Ramza pities Wiegraf, however, invoking his sister's name, wondering what she would think of him now. But the proud Wiegraf we once knew is gone. Only the possessed man of dark ambition and anguish remain. The Lucavi flickering within his embers requires kindling, and Wiegraf will sate such a demand. Technically, this is a two-part battle, or two-phase battle, as we first must push through the human Wiegraf. And boy, if you are not prepared for this, and only use one save slot, like I did back in the day, this is the moment you have just bricked your game and must start over. Sorry, but that's life sometimes. Wiegraf hits hard, and he hits fast. His lightning blade may one-shot you if you are a mage of some kind or don't have up-to-date gear, so you literally might not even be able to issue one command before the battle is over. That being said, there are quite a few different strategies you can employ going into the first half of this fight. One good tactic is to use the chemist's reaction ability, Auto Potion, which will use the lowest rank of potion you have after taking any damage. So if you only have X potions in your inventory, Ramza will immediately heal for 150 HP after Wiegraf attacks, which is about the same amount of damage Wiegraf will deal per lightning strike, or Hallowed Bolt in the PSP version. Considering most units, including Ramza, have on average around 200 to 300 HP by this point in the game, you only realistically have one turn to hurt him enough that it forces the transition into Phase 2. This is the delicate little dance that happens here. How do you pump out fat quantities of damage in one turn and still survive at least 2 turns of damage from Wiegraf? You could do what I did, which was use the Black Mage's Flare magic in conjunction with gear that boosts magic power output and essentially one-shot Wiegraf, or you could opt for the tried-and-true dual-wield Knight Sword strategy, though keep in mind Wiegraf has counter-equipped, so he will counter any physical attacks with one of his own, thus chewing into your precious HP pool even more. In any case, once you damage Wiegraf enough, he will teleport back to the top of the stairs and says, "This has gone on long enough." In this moment, Wiegraf will transform back into Belias, but with a little help this time. Belias summons a few demons to fight by his side, and oh boy times 3 are these little demon boys quite the annoying cunts. Each demon can use powerful dark magics, like Dark Holy, which have incredible range and can hit multiple units at once and do very good magic damage. So for Phase 2, if you can, having units with low faith will severely limit the damage output of these demons. High bravery and low faith units are quite the boon in Phase 2, so it's a good strategy to use if you can. Because you start Phase 2 with most of your units bunched together on the lower end of the stairs, it is quite easy for Belias or the demons to immediately take out a couple, if not all, of your units and thus leave you severely diminished, which will most likely result in a fail state. Speaking of, I failed this fight, as you will when fighting the Lucavi, many times and had to restart at least 4 or 5 times. RNG is RNG after all, and we all must bend to the whims of chance. Belias will often use his summon magics and the second most powerful summon in the game, Cyclops. Not only will he cast this on most of your units no matter where you move them, but he will do it quickly and often. Cyclops hits hard, man, so having a good counter or defense to magic is key here. Low faith or auto potion or heavy white magics are advised. To be honest, the best strategy here is to again full press into Belias and not worry about the demons. Let them take their unholy potshots. You need to dish out damage and you need to do it fast and hard. The fight should end in 2 or 3 turns, otherwise you will most likely fail and Belias will wipe his ass with you. So for my winning team comp this time, I went with a ninja, a samurai, a black mage Ramza, and another black mage clubber, and a geomancer equipped with a slot machine axe, cause why not? We were all about level 35 on average, the enemies being around level 29, so it was more or less a fair fight. Again, when fighting the Lucavi, don't worry about units dying, just keep pressing the damage, and eventually Belias will fall and die and turn into azure dust. Congrats, you have just beaten one of the hardest fights in the game. Cookies and cakes are in the break room when you're ready. Let's pour one out for old Wiegraf. Back in Riovane Castle proper, where Duke Barrington tried to extort Fulmarv, Alma enters the room and sees the carnage the Lucavi have wrought. Everyone is dead save one man, Isolde. Isolde sputters blood and asks for his sword. His knightly duty compels him still to fight, but he cannot see, and asks for a candle to light his way. Alma attempts to comfort the dying man, but he recognizes her voice and tells her to inform Ramza about the evil of the Orsite. Ramza was right, he says, and everyone must band together to defeat the greater threat. Alma says that Ramza has defeated the demon, but he thinks she means his father Fulmarv. At peace, Isolde thanks her and tells her to receive the Orsite within his doublet and keep it safe. His watch has ended, and with that, he shuts his eyes for the last time. And as if sensing his son's death, Fulmarv enters the room in that exact moment and attempts to away with Alma. But just as he touches Alma, Fulmarv's Orsite shines and murmurs, He thought he would never find their quarry so soon, mayhaps even a century from now, but here she is, right in front of him. What luck. Alma demands to be set free, but Fulmarv speaks truly when he says she has nothing to fear and that her life is safe. He knocks her unconscious and drapes her over his shoulder, the ultimate prize in tow. So, remember a couple hours ago when I first mentioned the god-awful AI for the guest characters, and the other countless times I reiterated that point again? Well, here's one of the worst culprits in the game in regards to guest AI. I genuinely rage quit over this back in the day, and to my surprise this time around, I did it again. On the roof of Riovane Castle, Duke Barrington has seemingly escaped the demonic onslaught inside his keep and has cornered Rafa. He harangues her about his virtuous gift of adoption, about the life she was allowed to lead, calling her a wretch to betray him so. However, Rafa does not care and has come for vengeance of her family and village. As Rafa brandishes her blade, Duke Barrington scoffs and draws his own gun on her, rebuking her silly claim of vengeance. He is too big to fail, and she is too small to win, and not to mention, he is her father. Rafa cannot do the deed, however, and Barrington thinks he knows why. The flesh remembers such trembling and fear when she was young, and he says in that time, when the fear blossoms into a different kind of flower, he will take that from her as well. Quite the delusional and psychotic romantic, that one. Just then, Merrick enters the scene and asks the Duke if it's all true. Finally, it seems the veil of ignorance has been lifted and Merrick sees with eyes unfettered. In a rage, and seeing her brother at her side, Rafa has steeled herself and says she will kill the Duke, but Merrick senses the Duke's itchy trigger finger and jumps in front of the bullet meant for Rafa. Still in grief, as Rafa thinks Merrick dead, she asks her father why he did it, because regardless of their traumatic childhood and the truth of the Duke's wanton murder, he is still their father after all. These three are family whether they want it or not. The Duke orders Rafa to collect the orsite Merrick has and give it to him. But in a darkly humorous twist of fate, Duke Barrington is anticlimactically thrown from the roof by an unknown woman assailant. A sultry, calm man's voice instead tells Rafa to give the orsite to him. It appears Marquis Elmdor de Limbury yet lives. Ramza orders Rafa to run away. He knows the Marquis and the lady that tossed the Duke are not human. They have answered the call of the Lucavi as well. The Marquis, being a gentleman of sorts, does not wish to kill Ramza if he would relinquish the stone in his care. He may even convince Fulmarv to return Alma, but Ramza knows too well these are the dark lies of the Lucavi. Impatiently, the Marquis orders his femme fatales, Celia and Letty, to take the stone by force. And so begins one of the worst battles in the game. First off, like all fights with the Marquis, he has some great gear to steal, if you can reach him, that is. His assassin comrades have some utterly disgusting skills at their disposal, mainly Shadow Stitch and Stop Bracelet, which guarantees stop and death, respectively. These are bullshit and entirely OP, and I hate them with every ounce of my being. I'm not bitter in the slightest, I swear. In order to steal Emdor's Muramasa katana, a very rare katana in the game, you must be able to reach him first. And because you start on the lower precipice of the roof, whichever unit needed to steal will have to have enough jump stat, or be able to ignore height from the Lancer job, and have at least 7 move in order to get even close to the Marquis. And this has to happen before Celia and Letty destroy you and before Rafa dies. And there's the rub. Rafa's craptacular AI will sometimes run straight into the Marquis and assassins and die immediately. Like, literally before you can even start the battle will end. The AI will spit in your eye, take your girl, and drive off into the sunset while throwing fistfuls of money in the air. Even typing this now, saying this now, thinking about it much later after it happened, I feel my blood curdle a little bit. Jesus Christ, I hate this fight. And when the robot revolution happens and AI becomes sentient, I will be on the front lines, knife between teeth, screaming about Rafa and Celia and Elmdor. Did I mention I very much dislike this battle? Well, because I do. Still, if you don't care about stealing Elmdor's rare equipment, then the best goal is to damage him enough as fast as you can, or Rafa will get herself killed and you'll lose the battle. Just pray to the RNG gods that the game allows you to do so, and eventually you will damage the Marquis enough that he retreats and the battle ends. I cannot stress enough how much I fucking hate this fight. Oh, I forgot, to add insult to injury, Elmdor has one of the strongest reaction abilities in the game, Hamido, or First Strike, which allows him to counterattack first and then delete your attack from ever occurring. Do I really have to say it again, or do y'all get it yet? I don't like this map at all, okay? Not one bit. Woosah. Once we kill Elmdor, he'll tell us to chase him to Limbury Castle for the rest of the Orsite. Now we have our next destination. As the dawn breaks upon Riovane Castle, Rafa comforts the dying Merrick. She cries over her brother's body, and in that moment, the Orosite she holds reacts and stirs. It seems to resonate with the grief of Rafa. Ramza remarks how it was the same with Wiegraf, and that it summoned forth the Lucavi in the first place. Rafa agrees to the whispers of the stone, and Ramza attempts to say no, but it is too late. The stone hovers and glistens, and then beams of light radiate down into Merrick and revive him. In a strange turn of fate, the stone of demonic power and darkness blesses Merrick with life, and nothing more, no strings attached. A pure moment of grief is rewarded with compassion and grace. Back in the room with Eastlude, Ramza finds the indigo Orosite he once held. Merrick explains what happened to him in a voiceover, or text-over as it were, and says a voice called out to him in a land of pure white. Return, it said to him, return to the side of the valiant, to the hearts that beat true. Ramza thought the stones were purely demonic in nature, but Merrick states that the intent of the stone bearers seems to give such power shape. Ramza steals his resolve and promises to rescue his sister Alma. The civil war has reached a stalemate, and both sides are beset with loss and fatigue. In a last-ditch effort to turn the tide of war, Larg and his northern sky march upon Fort Besselat, the bulwark to the south. We can now have Rafa and Merrick formally join our ranks. Merrick tells Ramza that they most probably took Elma to Milan, the high seat of the church's power. Ramza suspects not even the High Confessor knows the stone's powers, only that a select few do. The High Confessor might only want the stone for their perceived symbolic power, and knows nothing of the actual magics within them. Someone is using the church and the High Confessor for their own means. These whispers of Lucavi of the stones seem to have originated elsewhere. There is more to the plot than only lust for power. This closes out Chapter 3 and the first half of the game, and the first half of this playthrough / retrospective video. There is still much to come and much to do. Even though Chapter 4 is the last chapter of the game, it's almost equal in length to the first 3 in story and gameplay. So there's at least another 2 hours of video coming in some weeks that will detail the story and the endgame activities. I hope you've been entertained thus far as you're at work or on a second monitor playing some games or what have you, and I look forward to seeing you back in the final part of this video. Thank you for watching if you've watched this far, and go play the game right now if you haven't. Deal? Alright. Thank you again, and see you next time.